I'm Jason Sylvia, and this is the Creative Capital Show. A show about creative people and how those creative people turn into entrepreneurs by taking their creativity and turning it into a business and facing all the trials and tribulations along the way. Let's talk about sex. Did that phrase get your attention, or did it make you feel uncomfortable? Either way, you may want to listen to this episode's guests, Shannon and Christine Curley. Shannon and Christine are a mother-daughter duo that decided to start their own podcast called Sex Ed Debunked. In this episode, Shannon and Christine talk about how they started their show, why they wanted to talk about sex on a podcast, why sex sells but not sexuality, how the erotica industry is being rebranded as the adult wellness industry, how their podcast is made from start to finish, and a whole bunch of other topics related to sex. The story of their show is an interesting and entertaining one, to say the least. But there is also another story to tell, a more personal story, a story about the intersection between life and business, a story about taking risks, starting a new career, creating your own luck, leveraging your expertise in a niche industry, the realities of working with family, becoming your true self, and a whole lot more. And it all started with a day at the beach. Enjoy. But thank you for coming on the show and just getting right into it. If you want to both of you give a little bit of background on who you are, what you do, like why the heck we're doing this crazy thing.
Why we're all here.
Yeah. It is a crazy thing.
Yeah. I'll start. Beauty before age. Love you. I'll start. I'm Shannon. My mom and I here, we have a podcast called Sex Ed Debunked that we run out of Trailblaze Marketing in downtown Providence. We've been doing it for, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months.
4 months.
Time doesn't exist during COVID. You might not know this. But my background is, I went to school for English literature, which my favorite John Mulaney joke is like, I went to school for a degree in the language I already spoke.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I know cool. Perfect. So that was a great choice. I was a women's studies minor, which was just a precursor to me being queer. And, I work in marketing. I work in writing. I just do a little bit of everything. But, I got real bored during COVID and was like, what could I do to make things less boring? And I thought, talk about sex with my mom every week. That would be it. That's the normal default. It was either that or watch more Netflix. So I chose both. But that's my story. Yeah.
That's a good start. I would say my story is slightly different. Also, I want to do a podcast because I don't have enough on my plate already.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
So I started I practiced law in Rhode Island for too many years, 2.5 decades. Shannon graduated school. The older son graduated school, and so it was time for me to pursue something new and different. So I went back to get my second bachelor's degree at Rhode Island College. Then I kept going. And I went to get my master's degree, and I became very interested in the topic of sexuality, and particularly sexuality and health. So then I went to UConn, and I'm in the process of getting my PhD. So all brand new territory for me. Grew up strict Roman Catholic. Sex wasn't a thing that we talked about ever. So Shannon approached me, didn't you? You're the one who had this idea of, I got the offer to do a podcast.
Yeah, I do, like I said, I kind of do a little bit of everything in content creation, from strategy to branding, whatever, but I was doing some work for Trailblaze downtown, and Ezra Winters, who's the production manager down there, kind of just threw it out one day. He was like, would you ever be interested in doing a podcast? And I didn't really have a ton of inspiration for what I would do a podcast about, but I liked the idea of doing it because I think anytime you have the opportunity to create something and put something out there with your name on it, it's fun. Which, you know, Jay, like, you're creating this. There's got to be some passion behind it.
You'd think so, but I'm dead on the inside.
He's like, yeah, no, I felt nothing, but...
Is there a little fun?
I feel nothing.
I feel nothing at all. Well, fine then. So I had no inspiration really other than wanting to do something. And then I think that was like the next day, you and I, Mom, hung out and we...
I was gonna say, was it a conversation on the beach?
It was indeed a conversation on the... Yeah, I mean, it's partially sponsored by Sons of Liberty Loyal Nines, unofficially sponsored.
I feel like it's the setup to like one of those like just any like given any like drug like medical drug commercial like Preactin.
Yeah,
like, it's just like a mother and daughter on the beach.
Yeah, like smiling and laughing over salads.
It's like Preactin may cause these 20 side effects that are going to be worse than
want to talk about sex
then maybe worse than the thing we're actually trying to cure.
Yeah.
Well, Sons of Liberty Loyal 9 may have a side effect of starting a ridiculous podcast.
But the thing is, we sobered up and we still thought it was a good idea.
Right.
So what does that tell you? It tells you that we've been drinking since that day on the beach.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, speak for yourself. Yeah.
It has been COVID, so there's been a little more.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, we threw it out there, and to Trailblaze's credit, Trailblaze does small business, small, medium-sized businesses. They try to work with a lot of local entrepreneurs, and we threw that idea out to them, and like they were on board with it. They didn't balk at it. They didn't, say, "Are you crazy? This isn't what we meant when we said, do you want to do a podcast?" They were like, "You literally like write blogs for us. Why did you think that you could just come around and talk about sex?" They were on board with it, which I think is cool. And I mean, I'll say as someone who's worked agency life, has worked small businesses, has worked startup, has worked in corporations, it was refreshing to pitch a very personal idea and have it be taken seriously in that context and have it not be pushed back on. I don't think that's actually a very normal response, quote unquote, heavy quote normal, but I can imagine a lot of other situations where the response would have been, "You're out of your mind."
So I think that's a lot to take in, not to interrupt anybody. I think that's like a lot to take in from like the first couple minutes. So just to anybody listening, kind of give a recap. Mother and daughter team go to the beach, essentially, have a conversation about let's start a podcast, and the name of the podcast is Sex Ed Debunked. So we're gonna talk about sex among other things, and that's the podcast that you both have been doing. So like just so everybody knows, after after these first couple minutes, that's the thing, that's the platform you both are on, and I got a ton of questions, but one thing I want to do start with and focus on is because the way the show is talking about the creative, but also talking about like the entrepreneurial and also like the grind and like the stuff behind the scenes, because I don't think enough people talk about that, and also go into your various backgrounds and how that plays into the show and this idea. So I've said this before and I'll say it again. It'll be like a Tarantino movie. We'll be telling things out of order, but hopefully it'll make sense towards the end.
You'll catch up.
Yeah, it'll be different chapters. Like, wait, why did they jump to this? Was this a flashback? Who knows? But
the original Catch-22, was Joseph Heller did that. So Tarantino was ripping off of, an author.
Well, I was gonna say, isn't that like pretty much every every Tarantino
everything?
movie is inspired by something else, and then somebody else does a Tarantino movie. So
there's no originality. All originality is dead. Thank you for coming to our podcast.
Yeah. So then somebody's gonna do. So then what I'm waiting for is the father and son team to do like a version of your podcast, and then act like it was like this original idea. So we're gonna record this for for future reference now, so that when it happens, somebody could be like, "Bullshit! See,
we knew it was gonna happen.
I call bullshit. I know exactly when this thing happened."
I would guess that a father-son podcast might have a different lens, because our lens is definitely we're very academic, but we're also feminist, and we try to go cross generations as well as cross gender, cross sexualities. So we try to be a lot more inclusive in how we approach our
which isn't
topic.
to say that father-sons can't be inclusive, but
It's
is
not.
to say that it might just be a good job, son.
So besides the influence of sun, beach,
Alcohol,
and alcohol, I was because I tried to do my research for the show, so I was viewing a post that you had both made, and it said, hey, it came from an idea, from a conversation at the beach between the both of you. But was this an idea that either one of you had for a long time to do a podcast, or was it just because the opportunity from Trailblaze presented itself? And also why a podcast? Why not video? Why not some other form of media? That kind of thing.
So there was definitely the kind of thing where the medium preceded the idea, right?
Yeah,
it was like, hey, this is a thing that you can do.
Except from my point of view, I've been teaching human sexuality to college students, and I also ran a mindful sexuality workshop for adult women, and I was finding that people wanted this information. And here I was just talking to small groups of people in small classes. And I really felt like, man, there's got to be a way to get this information out there. So that little seed was in the back of my head, but how to do it and a podcast or anything else was not at all.
So you did like a lot of business ideas, not necessarily saying that this is or is not a business, but we'll get into that too. Mm-hmm. You identified a need in the market, essentially.
Yeah.
Because you were having these lectures that you were conducting, and so was it more like an output from the lectures, or was there outside of the lecture space you were finding out that people wanted to know this information as well?
I would think a little bit of both. I was finding in the lectures the students were like, "Why hasn't anyone ever taught me that?" And then when I would talk to friends and colleagues and people I played tennis with, and I'd tell them, oh, this is what we talked about in class, they'd be like, well, I didn't know that. Why didn't anybody teach me that? So I started realizing that there was a gap in not just college students, but across older adults as well.
So it was not just to one generation. So it wasn't just like, the younger generation does, but everybody else. And it's like, oh, wow, like everybody, like just across the generational spectrum, and just across so many different groups of people. I'm getting this response and feedback whenever I casually talk about like what I did today at work, basically.
Yeah, what I do at work.
Hey, like, oh, I wish I knew that. So you identified a need in the market, essentially.
Though I think Shannon would be the one that would use that terminology.
Yeah, right, as a marketer myself. No, but I think too, part of what kind of made it click so quickly after the opportunity to do the podcast, after that was offered, like, it was a day. It wasn't like, oh, let me ruminate on this for months and months and months. It was the next day.
That's going to be my next question, like how long you're like, hey, like let's kick this around,
But I think the reason why it was so quick that it was like, as soon as that opportunity was presented, it was kind of, oh, aha, we should do this, is because we'd had these conversations before. But I'll also say that we did not have open conversations about this when I was a kid. It really wasn't until my mom went back to school. And then, part of what was interesting for us and part of what we felt like was going to make for good content was the fact that there was experience and there was research. And so, like, my mom would say something to me like, ooh, I found this out about like the LGBT community. And I'd be like, all right, well, as the Q, that's interesting academically, but here's like my perspective from being a part of that community. And like, mom would learn something about hookup culture and be like, oh, I learned this about hookup culture. I'd be like, yeah, I know that. Also, like, anecdotally, I know this, that, and the other thing. And so I think we realized, we'd had those conversations one-on-one. And then when this opportunity to sort of have a platform became available to us, it was like, well, we're already having these really interesting conversations. Wouldn't it be great if we could put those conversations out into the world? And I think your question about, why a podcast was shared one, just like, it was offered to us. Great, it's out there. But we kind of also felt like it was a good thing for people of multiple generations to come back and listen to. We can direct someone to a particular episode and it's pretty short, and we can say, you just have to have Apple Music or Spotify or
unlike
whatever.
This show that has a runtime anywhere between an hour and a half to like 2 hours.
Well, and it's, understanding your medium and understanding your audience, right? Like we knew that we were approaching a topic that maybe people wouldn't be super comfortable with. So we wanted to keep it kind of bite-sized at first so that we could be like, okay, we're going to talk to you about sex, but like only for 20 minutes. And then you can go, splash water on your face and go back to work. But we are making longer episodes in the second semester because we feel like people are in now.
They're in, and people are like, the feedback we're getting is like, we want more detail, we want more research.
They're like, talk more. And we're like, okay.
Asked for it. Take a longer drive to work. Oh, wait, COVID. Now you're home again.
Yeah, right.
It's like you all asked for this.
Right.
It's true.
We want more of the content, all right?
All right, buckle up,
all
champ.
Right. Yeah. Would you have done this idea? And because I want to get into the whole Trailblaze and that as well, and then some other things. Would you have done this podcast or this idea, regardless of the medium, if Trailblaze wasn't around? And I do want to ask a little bit after that who and what Trailblaze is. But had the opportunity not been given to you, like, hey, we're this company that has podcasts, want to do a podcast because you're already working with us.
Right.
Would either one of you had gone through the process of like, hey, we're gonna do this thing, or was it really that an outside force, an outside person gave you the spark?
So I actually think we would have gotten there eventually, and I say
But
that
not right now.
Well, I don't know. I mean, before the podcast started, you had started co-leading mindfulness and sexuality workshops, and I helped build your website for that. And so we were already collaborating in that space. And I also think we're the kind of family that often says, like, what can we do to collaborate and work together? You know, my dad is a journalist. He does his own consulting and stuff, and he and I have talked about working together on projects before. So we're not our family's not strangers to being like, well, what if we did something together? And my brother's the same way. He works with my dad on a lot of different projects. So would it have come as easily? No, I don't think so. But I think with my passion, frankly, for creating content and my mom's passion for the actual knowledge itself, I think we probably would have gotten in some format gotten to this at some point.
I agree. I think we would have gotten here at some point. Probably would have taken me a little bit longer because I am in the middle of my PhD right now, which is quite intense. So adding this on has been definitely tricky. But at the same time, we're finding this semester that we're getting more in detail. I'm able to organize the content around what I'm teaching anyway. So Skipper.
Yeah,
So we have another guest that you can't hear. It's a cat that is apparently really interested in podcasting.
I'm going to take a picture of this so that you can share it so everyone knows what's happening.
And that said cat is just looking at every single wire and thinking, like, what does this do? And how can I break this?
It's really amazing, actually.
So I guess the bottom line is I think me and Shannon would have collaborated on something.
Our
just
family
not this
really
much.
get involved in our creative efforts, including the animals.
Yes, and the animals do join in.
You're fine. They just sit on my lap.
Just wait. Yeah. The cats are going to figure out how podcasting works, then we're all doomed.
And then they're going to be podcats.
Yep.
Oh, you said that. The first
Podcasters.
pun.
You can push him off.
Oh, boy. Not the cat about the puns, but anyway.
Yeah, no, the cat's fine, but the pun's got to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the only rules here.
So we hope there's not a catastrophe with the wires.
All right, it's enough. It was the perfect opportunity. We should probably take a pause.
So Trailblaze Media.
Trailblaze Media, yes.
Who or what is Trailblaze Media? Because you mentioned them already, and they're the ones who gave you the opportunity, gave you the shot, gave you like the catalyst for this, so to speak. Who or what is Trailblaze Media?
Yeah, so Trailblaze Media is out of downtown Providence. They're an arm of Trailblaze Marketing. Trailblaze Marketing's been around for, I think in its current name, it's been around since 2010, but it was around before then. The president is Chris Parisi. He's is very involved with small business in Rhode Island, very involved with Millennial RI, which is Travis Escobar is a part of that. But basically they are a content creation agency, does strategy, basic marketing, some web design, whatever. But they're great. And I started working with them during COVID, actually. They were just kind of looking to add more content creation, but a little bit more strategy to their client portfolio as well as their own portfolio. And one of my good friends works there, and so that's how I kind of got hooked up with them. And then
so they're not strictly a podcasting company.
No, they're not.
No.
So they do podcast creation, they do graphics, they do video, but pretty much all of that is run by Ezra Winters, who's just sort of their jack of all trades over there. But yeah, their plan for 2022 is to double their staff and to really branch out and do more media.
So is it a creative content agency?
So they do.
The best way to describe it?
Yeah, so they're basically marketing experts. They operate off of HubSpot primarily, and they do like small, medium-sized businesses, and they'll help companies come up with campaigns for their paid marketing, social marketing, media, website building, etc. So kind of just helping companies that are figuring out their own marketing plan, figuring out how to scale without hiring an in-house team to do so.
And just for the people that don't know, what is HubSpot?
Oh, sorry. HubSpot is it's a CRM. Fuck. When you just get into the agency speak and then you forget like what the acronyms stand for. HubSpot is like somewhere you can build websites, and it's like a content creation and website platform where you can also track like customer relationships and sales.
So, Trailblaze Media helps businesses run marketing campaigns, but they're also the content creation house, or are they trying to beef that part of the business?
Yeah, they're definitely trying to beef up their podcast, but they're definitely trying to lean more into video. If you know anything about the world of marketing right now, it's all about digital transformation, and that's just kind of going towards going beyond, your boring white papers and ebooks. And
after working for Dell, that was one of the taglines, and if I never hear digital transformation again, I'll be a happy person. But so they're trying to do more media, trying to put more media out, but that media is for other companies. Like, hey, I'm company X. I don't have a marketing team. I have money, but I don't want to make the post myself, or I don't want to make the content myself. I also have money, but I really don't know what I'm doing. I would go to Trailblaze, and then Trailblaze, we're gonna run this marketing campaign, this media campaign, but we're also going to create the content that's going to be used in the campaign as well. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So is your involvement with Trailblaze? Because correct me if I'm wrong. Christine, I know you're talking about you were a lawyer, then you started going into psychology and having to do with sexuality. Your background, Shannon, if I'm not mistaken, I know you mentioned a little bit before, but just to dive in a little bit deeper, you have a background in communications and marketing. So were you working directly for them? Because I know you would also, let's see, copy thief was one of the job titles.
Copy thief. I wish. Copy chief. Yeah. But, well, I'm a millennial, Jay, so I have 5 jobs.
I was gonna say content developer, creative strategist. You've
it's
done
a bunch
B2B,
of made up
B2C,
titles that just mean that
business to business and business to customer. But were you
B2B to C to B to T?
Were you working directly for Trailblaze, or were you doing more like a freelance thing?
Yeah, I was doing freelance work for them. So I have a full-time job, but I also do freelance for Trailblaze. And then I also do this podcast because, again, we just have so much time. But I was kind of in a consulting.
Sleep is overrated. It really is.
I was in the consulting and then contributor role. So I on the one hand, like help guide their content creation guidelines, best practices for how long should a blog be if you want it to perform in SEO and that kind of thing. But then also like writing the blogs and, whatever, helping put together marketing plans and things for clients. So, which I do in part because I don't get to do as much of that in my day-to-day job anymore. And I do in part because I really believe in what Trailblaze is doing because they're working with small and mid-sized businesses in Rhode Island primarily. And I think that's important.
If you don't mind me asking, what is the day-to-day job?
So I am a copy chief for a company that is an aggregator for Amazon, which basically means that we buy businesses off of Amazon.
Oh, okay.
But in that role, I primarily manage a team and I do just like a lot of reviewing. So I'm not doing as much actual creation of content. So I'll review proofs for graphics and things. It's just sort of a more senior role where, how it works when you're creative is the more senior you get, the less actual creative work you do. Yeah. So for me, Trailblaze is a way to stay in touch with the creative side of things and keep my skills sharp and make sure that I'm still, understanding the current landscape of the work that I'm passionate about.
So you were consulting for Trailblaze. And then
consulting and creating. So I write blogs for them, but also.
And then Trailblaze was doing podcasts or media on their own, or was this they were doing media for a specific customer or customers?
So they do a mix. They do videos for customers. They'll do graphics for customers, logos, that kind of thing. The one other podcast that they have in-house right now is called Anchored, and Anchored is Trailblaze's production, like through and through, and it's about Rhode Island, and it's about like Rhode Island humor, Rhode Island trivia, right? The saltiest takes from whatever,
that's what I was trying to differentiate, because I just was trying to figure out, like, if Trailblaze was making their own media in-house just for themselves, and they wanted to do more, needed more, and that's that way they were like, hey, do you want to do something?
Yeah, I think that they wanted to. So Anchored is very much owned by Trailblaze, right? It's
100%.
it's owned by Trailblaze to the extent that it is produced on Trailblaze time. But again, Shay Weintraub and Elise, who produced that, or who are the hosts for it, it's still very much their creative ownership, their own creative direction. But at the end of the day, it is a Trailblaze production. We are also a Trailblaze production, but because we are outside of Trailblaze and not employees of Trailblaze, it's just slightly different. And so I think they were looking for a kind of prove it production to show other partners, other clients that they can do something that isn't just Trailblaze.
So that's actually interesting. So because hate to put it in this kind of terms, but there's always like the what's in it for me, like because not everybody. So to any of the kids listening, people don't always just do stuff out of the kindness of their hearts. And I was trying to think of like what does Trailblaze get out of it? But that's interesting. So it's almost like Trailblaze, by having you do the show, it's almost like a proof of concept that they can then demo out to other and say, hey, this is an outside person. Look, we helped them make this podcast. Like, are you a realtor? Maybe you want to start a realting podcast, or how you want to market yourself. Like, we can help. Like, it can sound like this and look as polished. Okay, so that's interesting. That what they got out of it, or what they get out of it, is a proof of concept.
Exactly.
It's basically a POC with KPIs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for anybody who wants to know
proof of concept,
key performance indicators.
But we do have those, and that's, I think, where it kind of does prove itself out, is it's like, hey, we have this many downloads, we have this many followers, and now we can say to our clients, hey, in this amount of time, they were able to increase their listeners by this much and increase their followers by this much. I
was going to ask, like, so do you both own the show? Like, if you ever just wanted to be like, because if you go listen to the show, and we're going to get into the title too, because I got so many questions, but Sex Ed Debunked is the name of the podcast, but they're on the logos and on things, it's like a Trailblaze, because there are like podcasting production companies,
Jay,
but it says Trailblaze.
You've got to keep in mind that my mom is an attorney, so we've got a really good contract.
I was going to say,
we have a good contract.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, with your mom being an attorney, I'm pretty sure that you can take it anywhere, but do you have to...
It was carefully negotiated.
Do you have to answer to Trailblaze when it comes to metrics and things like that, or no?
No, we do. I mean, we do have set deliverables in the industry speak. Like, there is a certain amount of listenership we need to have, and we need to prove it. And, having guests on the show is something that we have to do, which we are delighted to do, but it's something that we, have agreed to, is to get more people to lend their voice to the podcast, which, for what we're doing with our podcast is something we would have wanted to do anyway, because we shouldn't just be two cis white ladies talking about sex ed. So we're happy to try to bring other people.
Wait, that's not what the show's about? Okay.
No. We just lost half our viewers. Shit.
I was going to say, I have barely little to I don't want to say barely. I'm like, to anybody listening to the show, thank you. Appreciate it. But at the same time, my numbers aren't up there, but I have nobody to answer to but me. So it's when I look at the numbers, it's like, okay, I have to do better. But it's interesting that you actually have like metrics and goals and things that you need to hit.
And because of my background, I'm like, I want to hit them. Like I track them. I don't think you've ever looked at the data and analytics, but I have them like pulled up on my phone every day in my history because I'm just curious.
No. I got some questions about that in a bit too. So
I do look, but I don't look as obsessively because I feel like we're doing really good content, and when we eventually find more and more people, they'll go back and listen to the old episodes, and people are doing that, and I hear that from the people that I recruit when I'm on vacation, and be like, hey, I have a podcast.
If this is a collaborative, like if this show ends up being like your show as well, like simultaneously, and your numbers go down, I apologize ahead of time.
Hey, thanks for tanking our podcast.
Thanks for tanking. Like no one listens anymore. So the name Sex Ed Debunked, was that within that conversation, or was that did that
actually
come along later?
I mean, I think
it was refined.
Hey, I'm an annoying person, and I bring a notepad with me like everywhere. So we were at the beach, and I'm like notepad in one hand, loyal in the other. But yeah, we actually wrote. I mean, again though, that's how my brain works. Is I'm like, we have an idea, let's just start, ideating. And yeah, we wrote down like 30 different names, I think. We didn't get to Sex Ed Debunked until like we culled down that list a little bit, but it was one of them that was on there. And the reason we ultimately went with it was one, we thought it would be a good format for the episodes to have myths every week, and so that's where like the debunking comes in. But also, as you may have caught on to, I'd love a good pun, and I was thinking about debunked, like, you know, you're in bed and then you're out of it.
Yeah,
You're debunking.
And our tagline at the end is always another myth
Put
to bed.
Yeah.
It was originally
Also, like, I'll be in my bunk. Yeah.
But originally it was Sex Ed Unabridged, right? Because we were trying to go beyond what you're taught in school and go beyond what you're taught on the internet and go beyond what you're taught in porn. Well, it doesn't teach you, but it's what you learn. So we were trying
For some
to figure
people,
out
that is what teaches them.
Yeah.
No, listen to the podcast. We'll teach you more, better things, better techniques. Well, not techniques, but research and the real facts behind sexuality. So, but I think Sex Ed Debunked was not too far down the line.
No, it was, I mean, you know, we had a deck, a presentation with like 6 different
She's
name
the
options
creative.
in it.
We'll just emphasize that a few times more. She's the creative. She set out some beautiful ideas and the graphics and all of that. And I just kind of try to figure out what the myths were.
So actually, what made you want to land on that? Because sex and sexuality is such like a broad topic, right? And you do cover a range of different, you know, topics within that topic on your show. But what was the deciding factor? Was it because of, like, you know, your current point in life where you're dealing in academics? I noticed you were saying, like, I think semester in reference to a season. So, you know, even the terminology, like semester as a season, what made you go, like, this is the name, but also, like, yeah, we want this to be, like, talking about some, like, myths, but in an educational, almost like classroom, like, wrapper around it, or a format around it.
We did the research.
Yeah, I think, well, you know, I mean, not for nothing, but we're living in a time where people think that they can do their own research. And so I think part of it for us was like,
You can't see my
hey,
eye roll on a
real-
podcast.
yeah, I think part of it was like, hey, this is a real education. It was also, you know, originally this was talking about the fact that sex education is not comprehensive in the U.S. or in most places, but that was our first myth, and that was sort of our inspiration was, man, like, we're calling it sex education in schools, and it's not sex education. If your only sex education is don't do it, then that's not an education, that's just a warning. So I think it was that. It was sort of the, like, this is what education ought to be. And then, yeah, it was the academic background. And then we kind of, you know, if you listen to the intro of any of our episodes, it's got this, like, do music. So we were kind of also playing with, like, the facts of life and Saved by the Bell.
That title is going to be, I mean, not the title, but the Facts of Life theme song is going to be stuck in my head all night.
Hey, you're welcome.
So thanks for that. I really appreciate it.
Our fucking theme song is stuck in my head every goddamn Friday when we record all day. I'm like, do shit every week. But it is very catchy.
But that was kind of her brainchild was to try to make it feel like a sitcom. So there'd be some lightness to it.
Well, and that was playing into the cross-generational aspect too, because that is something that's important and that we see as, like, sort of a differentiator with this, is that we are obviously, you know, not the same age.
Not at all.
That's, yeah, weird how I would be your daughter but not be the same age as you. It's insane.
Even though we look like a lot.
We do look seriously like. But that was part of what we were playing at too, is, like, the cross-generational thing. And almost like, you know, when you think about, like, Full House or, like, Seventh Heaven or any of those shows where they're like, and then we had to talk about sex.
Right. We had to talk.
Yeah, so we had to kind of blow that out as well. Like, the really serious episodes where they play, like, the really sad music when she's like, Dad, I decided to have sex. And it's like, do-do-do.
Or it's like a very special episode.
Yeah.
They had to announce it. They had to announce tonight's episode will be a very special episode.
We'll feature.
Actually, there was this is going really sideways, but there was a joke with when Dana Carvey had the Dana Carvey show, and which no one knows about because it got kicked off the air because he crossed a lot of lines.
Right. Yeah.
But there was one where they had to do the promos for ABC for the week, and so it was literally like a very special home improvement, and I think one of, like, the kids thought they were dying, and it's like, we're gonna get through this, buddy. It's like, and it's like, and then after that, all new Dana Carvey show, and they're like, what the fuck,
dude?
like, this is just such this, like, serious thing, and then the Dana Carvey show.
Da-da-da. Yeah.
But what did either one of you know about podcasting before taking on, like, yeah, we're going to do a podcast, but was it like, hey, we're going to do this podcast, or like, let's, or to use a sitcom trope, we're going to start a band, and then all of a sudden they get the gig,
Yeah.
and it's like always that trope of like, they got the gig, and then they you know, it's everybody at the school or whatever, and it's like, crap, we don't know how to
Shit,
play.
yeah.
Like, so was it that situation? Like, we're going to start a podcast? Like, what? We know nothing about podcasting.
I'm the researcher, so I listened to NPR how to do a podcast, and I
This is the
downloaded
default
stories.
answer. I don't know, man. I'm a researcher.
But I did. But that's what I
I
did.
don't know. I'm in
So
IT.
wait, you're against doing your own research, but you did your own research.
Well,
Yeah, interesting.
I listened to some podcasts, and I basically just NPR. I mean, how to do a podcast, and then I let Shannon take me by the hand and show me what to do.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have produced podcasts before in my previous agency life. That was one of the, again, deliverables, content types that we offered to clients. So I've been on that side of things, just episode planning, content calendars, and things like that. So that's part of what I brought to the table. And I think, again, kind of going back to what we were saying about why this is a good, ROI, return on investment for Trailblaze, is because I did it the way that I've produced in the past. And so, like, we have a very thorough topic tracker. We have a regular publishing cadence. We have a pretty regular episode time. Like, I try to follow industry best practices that I've learned by doing it myself. And so that's, like, it's something that I can hand off to Trailblaze to say, like, this is what these components look like, and you can model them for future clients.
Because speaking of debunking myths, since we're on the subject, I want to get both of your opinions of it, and especially from one person who has experience in making podcasts, another person who, hey, I'm gonna do some research and
Zero.
get into it. I want to hear both of your perspectives on this, because I think this is really interesting. Would either one of you agree that there's this perception of, like, especially when it comes to creating content, yeah, everybody can create content. Like, anybody can now with, like, a phone.
No, that's a myth.
You got a phone, and the cat's trying to create content right now.
Yeah,
It's trying to
doing a
create some
great job.
music.
This cat is, like, literally out of control. I'm gonna go murder him real quick. I'll be back.
Continue your question
Right,
while she takes
I'll let it
care of
pause
the
just so I know to edit right here.
Skipper, you gotta be fucking kidding me, dude. He's not usually like this.
Yes, he is.
Sure.
This is crazy.
It's a
Come
lie.
here. And then the fucking fat one is like,
See, this is why we don't do the podcast in her condo.
Got it. This makes a lot more sense now.
no, I mean, they're not, he's really not usually like that. Alright. Mango Honey, the food's where it always is. You're just stupid.
So Mango is a cat she brought back from St. Croix.
Yes, I lived in St. Croix.
Shannon lived in St. Croix and ran a bed and breakfast. When she got laid off due to COVID, she went to St. Croix and ran a bed and breakfast with a friend for 6 months.
Damn.
And Mango was the stray cat that she took
Yeah,
home.
the fat one was the string, so riddle me that one.
Spent a lot of time in
She was
garbages.
fat.
I mean,
She was fat when I got
I was gonna say, looking cute in front of tourists, but
Yeah.
Yeah, it worked.
Anyway, you had a question.
anyway.
Anyway, sorry that my cat
No, but
was-
so we're, I want to hear both of your perspectives, coming from some person who's produced podcasts and somebody who's never done a podcast before. Would you both agree with the sentiment that anybody can make a podcast right now, especially with, like, the way we have services and things like that? Like, you can get on your phone, you can record yourself, anybody can make content. So anybody can, like, from a technical perspective, can make the content. But
Can you make it good?
But can you make it good? And and do you know the ins and outs of, like, an idea to finish? And I just want to get both of your thoughts on that, because I think that's, like, an interesting thing where it's like, oh, like, all I gotta do is record myself talking. Like, yeah, I can make a podcast, but I there's obviously more to it.
A lot.
So I
more
want to
it.
get, like, both your perspectives as somebody who's had experience making podcasts, somebody who's never done a podcast before.
Well, as someone who's never done a podcast before, it's an extraordinary amount of work, of the conceptualizing, the planning, so much of what Shannon has done in terms of, she set up the topic sheets, she set up the Google Sheets, she sets up a script link every week. And, we really have to sit down, and we have meetings like every few weeks as to, like, which myths do we want to tackle next, and how do we want to tackle them, every Thursday night before we record, we sit down and we work on scripts and we work on ideas. And it's not like we just show up at a studio for 2 hours or an hour and a half and just shoot the shit.
And there are some podcasts like that
We
that are
do
actually
not.
good too.
Right, yeah. That's the
not.
thing, right?
We do not just do that.
The nature of our content, the nature of what we're talking about is that we do want to be well researched. So there is a lot that goes into it. But I'll also say that one thing that I have a few friends who since we started Sex Ed Debunked have said to me, like, I've been thinking about starting a podcast too. And almost always what they say is, but I don't know if I would have enough to talk about. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are like, I would talk about something for like maybe 3 episodes and then I would run out of material. And so I think that's like, if you have something that you're passionate about and you truly feel confident that you could continue to talk about it for weeks and weeks and weeks.
And you're not dead inside like me.
I mean, it depends on how much you can talk about being dead inside.
That's a good point.
To myself, hours. But yeah, I think that's maybe one of the hardest things, other than the practical just logistics of it, is that and that's what I've heard from most people, and that's why so many podcasts have guests on them and have experts stuff, is that because you do run out at some point. And that's why like I am beyond diligent about keeping our topic sheet and just like adding topics anytime I think of it, is because I don't want the well to run dry.
And that it won't. There's so much in sexuality and there's so many myths, but at the same time, we want to do stuff that's relevant. We want to do stuff that people care about, not just us. And and that when Shannon did the research about other podcasts and we looked at other podcasts that talked about sexuality, this is really different. And it's different because we have our dynamic. And Shannon brings so much to the table in terms of her personal experience and her experience in media and popular culture. And I bring in the academic experience and also the experience of like, hey, this is brand new to me. That we're very conscious that that's what makes us different. So we're very conscious about making sure that we are very systematic in how we handle our topics and our flow of topics.
Yeah, so I guess to answer your question, yes, I think anyone can. But I think there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that is just a lot to manage. And so it really depends on, I think, your time and your passion about it. Like if you are passionate about something and you have time to do it, then you can do it. If you want to like passion. Bo Burnham it and like lock yourself inside and produce something over the course of a year, you can do that. But there's just a lot. And I think it depends too on like how thoughtful you are about it, like how much thought you want to put into it, because you're right. There's totally a podcast where people just show up and shoot the shit. And that's entertaining sometimes.
Can you both, just want to get that over so that way I can edit that out, but can you both walk me, since we're on the subject, can you both walk me through, and just to give, some information for the listeners of the show as well, from like idea for the topic or the myth of the show, from like that point all the way to like the show is now out there on whatever podcast platform. Mm-hmm. Can you just walk through like all the individual steps, which is interesting that because you're also working, it's not just you're both in control of every single aspect of it, because you're working with the agency and you're working with some other people. So can you just both walk me and the listeners through just every like step along the way? Because it's got to be some kind of hell of a journey of here's the idea, here's a myth, but then it's like, all right, now it's out in the world, and then repeat the idea. Before
Shannon goes into like the detail of the production, I will say the one thing that's great is nobody oversees our choices of myths.
Okay.
We have 100% creative control about what we choose to do and when we choose to do it. So a lot of it is, we kind of have a whole bunch of myths and we have a whole list of them. And the very, very first step, I would say, is figuring out what order to do them in and what makes sense based on what's happening in the news, what we're hearing from our listeners, and also sometimes what's going on in the popular culture.
Yeah, so let's see, step by step. So yeah, I mean, we started out, when we came up with this idea, we started adding to the topic sheet. I think that was like one of the first things I did was create a Google spreadsheet just to like keep track of topics and ideas. And the nice thing about that is like it hits on the cloud. So we constantly are adding to it. If we're having conversations with people or something comes up in a comment, like we'll just add that in. And so we do have a wealth of topics
list
just for that. So we'll come up with a topic. We do record bi-weekly on Fridays. And so we do 2 episodes at a time. So that's part of our process to just save time, is that we'll do 2 episodes at once. So yeah, we'll come up with an idea. Usually I'll create, like my mom said, I'll create scripts, links, and then we'll start dropping ideas into the script links. Usually I come up with the myth, or we'll talk together about what we think the myth is. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be airtight. It's just like to keep that format up. But then usually we'll meet the night before we record, and we'll go through both of the scripts together, and we don't heavily script our episodes. We really do try to keep it conversational, but it's more like we put some guardrails on it as to like, if we talk about this, can we faithfully talk about it in one episode? Can we authentically talk about it in one episode, or do we need to save that topic for another episode? And what we're doing in the second season is we're trying to add more information that we didn't get to go into detail on in the first semester.
Kind of like the first semester was like the intro course,
right?
And now we're in the intermediate course.
It's the 101, and now
yeah,
we're
exactly.
in the 201.
Now we're 102. Yeah.
If you passed all the tests.
So then we'll do that. We'll have that sit down, and then the next morning we'll go in and record. And we do try to do them. We try to plan and then go in the next morning so that it's still fresh on our minds. And then usually, we'll record in studio. We do one rolling take. Ezra, again, our sound producer, our sound engineer, will give me a rough copy of it. I do the QAing of it to see if there's anything that, missed the mark or needs to be cut or whatever. And then in the meantime, I manage our social media. So I try to consistently post, when we have a new episode out, I'll post that. When a new myth is put to bed, I'll put that up on our social. And usually I'll pull out a couple key terms from any given episode just to highlight them. Behind the scenes, we do everything through Buzzsprout. So that's where we handle our synchronizing for our publishing. That's where we do our transcripts. It's where we do sound bites. It's where we do episode descriptions. And I'll put references in there. If we refer to certain sites or studies in the episode, I'll make sure that that's up there as well. So it's pretty comprehensive. And to go back to your earlier question, you don't have to do that. I do that because there's a certain quality of deliverable that I hold myself to as someone who does produce content and create content professionally. And again, I think that is part of the return on investment for working with Trailblaze, is that by doing all of those things in the best industry standard that I can, I'm providing them a template that they can then service clients with.
Creating your own luck. One can look at how Shannon and Christine were given the platform to create their podcast and say, oh well, they got lucky. Luck being something that just happens is one way to look at it, but another way to look at it would be to redefine luck as when preparation meets opportunity. Christine changed career paths and went back to school to study psychology with a focus on sexuality and mental health. And this would greatly help Christine in becoming a subject matter expert on those topics. Shannon was working freelance as a content and brand strategist, gaining the experience necessary to make creative content on a regular basis. And both Shannon and Christine were having conversations about sex and sexuality long before the opportunity for a podcast presented itself. The important thing is, you need to put yourself in a position to be able to receive opportunities in areas you're passionate about. So be prepared, especially when the moment to seize an opportunity arrives, and create your own luck. So, gone over how you got the idea, a little bit of why you wanted to do the idea, which I want to get into more now, and how you got the opportunity and how, just from a logistical standpoint, technical standpoint, the show is made, right? So Sex Ed Debunked, even just in the name, it's got kind of a, I want to say, well, I guess a little bit quirky take on education and sex education, but also debunking myths. Why, besides seeing that, people wanted to, identifying a gap in the market, as we were talking about before, was there any apprehension of, you had the idea and you get excited, but was there any apprehension or oh, hey, we're talking about something that is, with the internet, with content, every niche, right? Every niche has an audience. Granted, And when it comes to sex and sexuality, you can cover, there's a lot of different ways you can approach it.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, though, it's this, even with its quirky, even like you were talking about the theme song, like the quirkiness, like it is a serious show tackling, serious things.
Definitely.
Some of the topics, I think the Baby It's Cold Outside was like not
that was
serious,
a holiday episode.
But it was funny, but it's also like real information. And again, you were saying that, we're in the age of everybody quote, like I'm doing air quotes here that nobody can see. Everybody does their own research, right? Mm-hmm. Was there any apprehension, or was there any, second thoughts, or was there any we're covering something taboo here. We're covering something that people just don't generally talk about. And hence the reason why there's a need in the market.
Well, right, yeah.
Right?
The apprehension is also the need. That's the problem.
So, was there any apprehension on, with apprehension, was there any apprehension on your end of like, oh, this is like, we're talking about something taboo. Like, should we be doing this? Like, how are we going to do this? Like, how is it going to affect, how are people going to be receptive to it? Did any of that cross into, into your minds at all?
Well, first, the apprehension was, I got to talk to my dad and my sisters because they listen. My dad, we talk about my dad, Shannon's grandpa on the podcast a few times because, he came to my master's thesis. He knows what I research. So we did have to have a conversation and say like, okay, we're going to talk a lot about sexual issues. We want your support listening to the podcast, but please be aware, we're going to, first episode, we talked about, sex education in the schools. And the next episode, we were talking about what kind of sex education did you get at home? And I was raised strict Roman Catholic. I got none.
I was going to say, you were mentioning that before. So I was like, I'm going to save these questions
None.
of why did you want to do this later on?
None. And so, but that's the things that I needed to talk to my sisters about. I'm like, well, I'm going to be calling out the fact that we didn't get it, and we'll be talking about my upbringing and our upbringing. So there was some apprehension there, which turned out to be unfounded. Family's been really supportive. For me, maybe a touch apprehension because I'm in a pretty serious PhD program, but up to now, everybody's been supportive. So there was a lot of apprehension around it, but so far, I think, at least on my end of it, people are recognizing there's a need and that we're handling it. It's fun, it's light, it's entertaining, but there's also serious information that people need to hear.
I was just going to say that PhD program also deals with, to my knowledge, sex and sexuality.
Not really.
Oh, no?
No.
Okay, all right.
No.
Never mind. Okay, never mind.
I'm a trailblazer in that program.
Okay. All right. See, I thought that was like you were in a program that was already dealing with that.
No.
Oh, all right. So
I'm crafting my own.
You're doing your own. You're crafting your own lane.
So I'm in what's called social psychology. So social psychology is human behavior and how people interact with each other. So sexuality falls under that. But the advisor who took me on, to this day, I admire him for boldly accepting me as a student, because this is stuff he learns things every day when we have meetings. And to his credit, he has involved me in research and commentaries talking about sexuality and talking about cultural sexism that he never, ever, ever would have considered before. And so he's brought me into he's a very distinguished professor at UConn, Blair Johnson, and he's brought me into some things that I'm very grateful for, and I'm grateful that he takes my research seriously.
So there was a risk that you took professionally.
And academically.
Professionally, in that you went from lawyer and then from like being a lawyer, successful lawyer, and then...
She didn't leave because she was bad at it. She was very good at it.
I was very good at it.
I want to touch on that briefly as well, and then I'll get to you. What made you want to go from like, hey, I'm a successful lawyer, and now, I'm going to get in this PhD program and talk about psychology, but specifically sexuality and et cetera.
It was not quite that linear.
Okay.
It was really more of the legal profession has become toxic and it wasn't good for my health. And so I needed to I had tried to whittle around the edges of like finding work-life balance and blah, 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 blah. And eventually I was like, we've got to do something completely new. I practiced law until last summer.
So this is recent.
So I was still keeping my finger in the law in case this whole academic career didn't work out. So I stopped in 2020 is when I finally declared myself an inactive as an attorney. So I went to get a second baccalaureate, a master's degree, and took 1 full year of my PhD program before I officially became inactive as an attorney.
So you were so...
It was a hedge.
So you were so passionate about this thing that you're like, yeah, I'm changing my professional life and I'm going to do this podcast as well. Like,
yeah.
Just the level of like, yeah, I'm all in on this. Was it the same for you? And like, did you have any apprehensions in your head as far as like, oh, like I'm taking a risk. This is a taboo thing. Like, how is this going to affect me? I also think because there's a difference in like, you're in one stage of a career, and I'm sorry, I'm looking around because I'm not going into names. So if anybody's being confused as far as like, wait, who is he talking to? So Christine, you had already had a career,
I did.
like a professional life, and then you started a new professional life, and you're starting this podcast. But Shannon, from like a generational perspective, like your professional life is still going, and so was there any risks or apprehension just from a general standpoint? Like, hey, I'm going to be talking about this taboo, this possibly taboo thing. And also, how is it, like, could it possibly affect your professional life, and especially if you're doing freelance work on top of working for, a large, like, corporate entity?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's more of a risk because I'm a lot earlier in my career. And so, yeah, I definitely had to think about it.
Yeah. So I would definitely want to get your perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm pretty early in my new career.
Your new career is about this subject. My career is not. No, I think it definitely was something I had to think about. But I will say, like, I think it's important. And in every job I've had at different companies, I've never been afraid to talk about things that I think are important. In my first job, I kind of hit a wall and ended up leaving because I was really trying to push for, talking about our subjects differently gender. And gender, and I was pushing basically for trying to stop. I worked for a toy company, so I was like, can we stop calling them boys' toys and girls' toys? Can we like really think about making?
So was that company Hasbro?
It was, yeah. I don't know why I feel like I have to like shield them because they were assholes to me. But anyway, when I was there, that was my first job, and I was not afraid to push the envelope on that and be like, hey, why don't we push for change? Similarly, in my other jobs, it was the same thing where I was like, we need more diversity on our images. We need to speak, in a more inclusive way. I've continued that in my new role, and I will always be like that. So on the one hand, like, yes, there's definitely there was some apprehension of, I'm going to put out this sex podcast, basically. And you're right, like, it is about research, and it is academic, and it is serious. But of course, when someone sees that it's Sex Ed Debunked, they're like, so you have a podcast about sex? And I'm like,
well, I mean, especially the topics next semester are going to be a little more edgy too. So.
Yeah. So it was something I did have to think about. But I don't know. I guess I've never really shied away from ruffling feathers when I feel like they're the right feathers to ruffle.
You haven't, Shannon. You're brave. I will say that. My daughter is one brave, creative, brilliant person, and I am grateful that she's the one I'm working with.
Thanks, Mom. I will say it took me a long time to share the podcast with anyone at work. I was kind of waiting for the right forum. I wanted to share it because we needed listeners, but also because I wanted to share
and it's Houston. They need it. They need the sex ed.
The education. Yeah. But I mean, I'll be honest. I did share it when I got invited to join the LGBT group at work. That was like when I first felt really comfortable sharing it. And I will also say that one of the first episodes we did was an episode about coming out, and it was a super, super public episode. Yeah. And I mean, my identity is weird and fluctuating, and so talking about it was strange as it was, because I was like, well, I'm not a lesbian, and I don't really identify as bisexual, so I guess I'm just kind of queer. Which was a weird conversation to have because I'd never had it out loud before, and then all of a sudden the time when I'm really having that conversation out loud is like on a podcast that is going to be made public to anyone who wants to hear it. And then I also decided to share that with my professional workplace because it was the topic that made the most sense for the group I was invited to. But that was kind of a waterfall of like, oh wow, like it's out there now.
Yeah.
Do both of you think that you would have, because you're both very passionate, right, and about this topic to the point where you're taking on a certain amount of risk. And I think with the, everything that's going on, depending on when you're listening to this, the Great Resignation, right? Yep. And, people are taking leaps and risks because maybe they have to, maybe they want to, maybe like life came around and gave them an opportunity. Do either one of you think you would be taking this risk if maybe you didn't have an employer that was so understanding, or maybe you didn't have a professor that was so willing, or if Trailblaze was, not around? Do you think that this risk, like, would it have turned out a little differently? Because I think sometimes when people put out ideas into the world, right? There's like any idea, not even,
it's always a risk.
Because it's a
risk.
Vulnerability. It's a risk, and we don't think about it sometimes. I think with social media, because it's like so instant, like you can just hit a button and the content's out there to the world, right? That's great. The flip side of that is you can hit a button and the content's out there to the world.
Oh, God, yeah.
And and the reason why I'm asking this question, because I'm wondering if there could be somebody listening, right? Like, oh, hey, that's great for you that you were able to take that risk. Wonderful. I can't because of X, Y, and Z reason. So do you think that there's an element of, I don't want to say luck, but like that, or maybe it is luck that you're both lucky enough to be in spaces in areas of your life where the risk and the weighing of it, like, or would it be different if you didn't have the support system and the people around you that are like, oh yeah, like we're good with this?
So I think you probably have a different perspective, but my perspective on that is that I have also put myself in a position to have opportunities that align with the things I'm passionate about. I chose to work for the place that I work for because it has a good culture, and I had other opportunities, and that was the place I wanted to work. And like I said, when I worked at Hasbro and I felt like I was hitting a wall with what I was passionate about and that I wasn't getting the response I wanted, that's when I started looking elsewhere. And Trailblaze, I started doing work for because I believed in their passion for what they do, and I wasn't surprised that they approved our topic. Right. I think I was in some ways, because I was like, that's cool that they have no questions, that they're just going to run with it. But I wasn't surprised, because I'm like, this is a company full of people who are passionate about what they do. And if they recognize that this is something we're passionate about, then it follows that they would support it. And so, I
want to say something though, Shannon. It wasn't just your passion. It was also your thoroughness and your diligence in thinking it through, and both of us doing that.
Yeah.
Because it's not just luck and passion. It's actually willing to put in the hard time and the hard effort. And it's
not everyone can just Donald Draper it and pull something out of their ass. It is preparedness as well. So I guess in that sense, it's a risk, but it's also
calculated.
It's a calculated risk.
And we've always taken, like, we are people who take calculated risks. So yes, I was an attorney, but I was an attorney who left a large firm practice and started my own practice, writing legal briefs and doing research for other attorneys. So I took a chance 25 years ago. So that's kind of the people we are. It's kind of the daughter I raised, to take a calculated risk, knowing what your skill set is and knowing you're willing to put in 150% because you care.
Well, the reason why I wanted to ask that question, because I think somebody's going to look at the title, and I'm probably going to, I wish I could get the rights to that. I think it's a Salt and Pepper song, but I won't be able to. So let's talk about sex. But I think the subtext or what that episode's really about, and the way that I hope it's received, is that, if you're passionate about something, even if it's niche or it's taboo or, or just being willing to take that leap of faith, being willing to take that risk, whether it's creatively, professionally, or both, because especially now with everything that's going on, with COVID, Great Resignation, and all that kind of thing, I think we're seeing more and more of that. So hopefully somebody listens to that. That's why I wanted to really ask that question, because I think that's the thing that the reason why when we were talking about doing this episode, at least from my perspective, with my show being the way it is, about everybody focuses on the creative but not the grind, as you were saying, right? The hard work, but also like it's just a leap of faith to even be willing to do that sometimes, and especially if you're doing something that's not popular or taboo. So thank you for answering that, because I think that gives it a different way, and that's the stuff that I really wanted to drive home, is that at the end of the day, you're both taking a risk and doing something that you're really passionate about, and you took a calculated risk, but you were willing to do it anyway, and you're willing to just, all right, bite your lip, take the trip, like, let's go, let's do this.
Yeah, and, I think, too, it's important to remember that there are so many different avenues to get to the thing that you're passionate about, or to get it out there, because I started doing work for Trailblaze because I was itching to create more. I liked my day-to-day job, but I was itching to create more, and that's what I was passionate about, was creating.
Well, you made a good point, and that was another thing I wanted to harp on. How important do you think it is when somebody has an idea, or maybe they don't even know how to go about it, or cover a certain thing, or do a certain thing, that they be around people or be around that thing, or just, not necessarily osmosis, but like you gotta get as close as to that sun as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think putting yourself in the right space is a big step.
Definitely.
I mean, you put yourself in the right space, Mom, right? You were like,
I did.
Well, but before you even went back to school, you had started thinking more about mindfulness and thinking more about being in touch with your body. And that's because, you went through your experience with having chronic Lyme.
Right,
and so it made you be more in touch with your body. So really, you can trace the beginnings of when you started thinking more about this to where you are now, but you put yourself in a space where you could really learn more about it. You aligned your nerdiness with your actual holistic need to understand.
Well, you're right. And a lot of it is like this podcast, it's about learning. I mean, we say right up front, we're not the experts, we're learning. And so this process of creating the podcast and getting to a space where we could feel that we could take this risk together.
But you always say, you quote Brene Brown, who you love, but you always say you got to get in the arena, right?
Got to get in the arena.
And that's the idea, is that if you want to do something that you're passionate about and you want to take the risk, the first thing you have to do is get in the space where you can do it.
That's right.
Well, and it's like I'm going to probably butcher this saying, but the idea of like, oh, lucky or fate or being there when like luck happened, like you got to put yourself you have to put yourself in an area or in that position for luck to actually happen. It's not just all luck. It's like, no, you got to like kind of be ready for it for when that opportunity comes, and then you seize that opportunity. Right.
It's like, I didn't know that I was going to be offered the opportunity from Trailblaze to produce a podcast, but being in a space where I was creating more made me better at being a creator. Mm-hmm. And so it put me in a better position that if we wanted to do this podcast down the line, or we wanted to do a webinar, or we wanted to do more mindfulness workshops or whatever, even just being in that space was priming me to be better at delivering whatever it was that we wanted to deliver.
Right. And I mean, heck, I had to have the crazy courage of applying to a PhD program at 50. Right. I mean, you want to talk about uncertainty.
That's like going down the highway and just throwing the car in reverse. Like, that's not even doing it one way. It's just like, let's just throw in reverse and see what happens. And like, all right, Jesus, take the wheel. Let's see. I don't not that I don't, but the perspective of this podcast is one thing. We're going to go into, I have some questions about the content and the subject matter of your show, but from also a behind the scenes and like a business and creative perspective, because as you both said, you're going through the process of learning, making the show. I am definitely not the expert on the subject matter that you both talk about. So if you do want to hear that, I highly encourage everyone, because I have listened to some episodes of the show in preparation for this. Go listen to the show Sex Ed Debunked, and I will give you some time at the end of the episode to say whatever you want.
All right.
One thing that I find interesting, and I definitely want to get both your perspective on, because I think this goes into the whole like logistics and business and things of that nature, is sex sells. Like, it does. It does in this country, right? It sells.
But not sexuality.
But
that's the difference.
Thank you, because that's what I find so interesting, is like, it seems like nobody has a problem when like, hey, let's get a sexy guy, girl, they, them, person, whatever you want, however you want to word it, to like sell a product. Like that's been happening, right? That's advertising. That's fine. We can have it. To a degree, we can have it in our media. But the moment, like, how about talking about sexuality, or sexuality to sell a product, or sexuality of a character on a show, or why do you both, like, from you both doing the show, what? And this could probably be a separate, like, 4-hour episode. Why do you think that is? Like, why is it that, like, hey, sex can sell, like, that's fine. I mean, porn, there are some people who have, something against porn, but like porn is like a accepted thing to a degree. I mean, like Playboy.
Well, it's certainly
like
accessible.
It's accessible. Like that using sex, but sexuality, like why is that the thin red line as far as like, nope, like that's the thing that that's taboo. Sex sells, fine. Sexuality, no.
I think sexuality makes people uncomfortable.
I do. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
more than just sex does, because, you can write sex off as being, it's necessary to procreate. Like, we can call it a necessity, but sexuality is a much deeper conversation. It's a much more confusing conversation in a lot of ways.
And sexy's kind of about fun and flirty and adventure.
And sexuality it's a nightmare.
It's a mess.
Figuring it out is a fucking mess. So people want to just say, call it a binary. Please just be straight. Maybe don't be gay. Please don't be gay either. Like, most people
right.
don't. And then you want to introduce queer, and you want to introduce 17 other letters in the LGBTQ, and it confuses people. And I think,
and you want to talk about feelings and arousal and performance and body image, and that stuff gets serious. And the serious stuff is harder for people to really dig into and really question. So it's a lot easier to wear a sexy dress, wear sexy lingerie, wear,
yeah, and I
sexy
think,
jeans.
Unfortunately, it's become very politicized, right? It's like, the left cares about sexuality and LGBTQ rights and all this stuff, and the right doesn't. And that's not true. It's not that black and white. But I've seen on so many like forums and things, the most random forums, right? Like, I'll be on a subreddit and it'll be about sports, and they'll be like, oh, the first, out gay football player and declares in the draft, and everyone's like, oh my god, who cares, stop pandering to the left. And you're like, he's not pandering to the left, he's literally just gay,
right?
But it becomes politicized. And so I think there's a lot of gray area, and I think there's just a lot of confusion, and there's a lot tied up into the conversation of sexuality that is not necessarily brought up in just sex.
From a business perspective, right? Because I think that brings up another interesting, like almost like a sidebar question, but it's still kind of in the arena of this main question, because you were saying things about sexuality becoming politicized. The previous guest I had on the show, Stephen Burkhart, runs a creative marketing agency, and he was saying as you were talking about that, a quote from that show. Also, shameless self-cross promotion. Go listen to the Stephen Burkhart episode after this one. He was saying, marketers today are playing with fire because depending on how you word or present something, especially it's a bit, because like it's individual is one thing, but like a business is another, or even like a business using an individual or an influencer or whatever to promote a certain product, if it's taken a certain way, and like the Folgers commercial, I won't get into the Folgers commercial, but you're both kind of looking at me like, you know what I'm talking about, that Go look up Folgers holiday ad. I won't even get to that. There you go. That's maybe another future holiday episode for you
next
too.
year. See you then, if we make it.
But as far as like, even if it's not the intended thing, if it's perceived a certain way, it can mess with the business. It can mess with their revenues and things like that. As far as that goes, and again, like, how have you, from even doing the show and also working in the professional spaces you're working in, how have you seen businesses deal with, interact, / promote, or maybe not promote sexuality? Not selling sex, because a lot of businesses do that, or whether it's like subliminally or just over the top, but businesses dealing with sexuality when it comes, like, as far as like in a professional manner.
So I have a couple of thoughts on that.
I have a few myself too.
So one, I think last year during Pride was like one of the first times where I really saw a lot of backlash against performative allyship in corporate.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I was going to actually mention that, but you took the words right out of my mouth. So that there's that aspect too. So go off, because that was one of the things. As I'm asking the question, I'm like, oh wait, yeah, corporate allyship, and like, because that's been a trending topic, especially the last Pride that happened. So please continue.
Yeah, so I think that is just when companies all of a sudden put rainbow flags up and change their logo to rainbow and whatever, and that's great. But do they follow that up with any of their quarterly proceeds going to the Trevor Project or Human Rights Campaign or whatever? And the answer is no. So that, I think, was a big thing, like I said, last year. So that's kind of using sexuality to make yourself look like you've got great social values at a company, but if you're not also, for example, providing coverage for adoption fees, and you're not, considering that in your benefits plan and things like that.
Or health insurance.
Your health insurance,
surgeries.
are you covering hormone therapy if someone needs that? So there's a lot of things, and that's where it becomes performative, is that you're, yes, that's great that you slapped a rainbow on your logo.
And what's your real diversity in your employees?
Right. I mean, and the, great example, again, like my previous employer always had a booth at Pride, but refused to gender neutralize the toy lines. So that's performative allyship. So to that extent, they're using sexuality, I think, to have a better, have a better reputation or a better CSR.
Corporate image.
Yeah, better.
We can get this market now because look, like we're super open and accepting.
We want to get the queer market.
Well, and that's CSR has also become a buzzword in the last 3 years, which is corporate social responsibility. And so that's where the backlash of performative allyship has come from, is as companies talk more about CSR, they're doing more performative things.
Oh, you mean like the NFL talking about social justice?
Yeah, and we're like, okay, sorry, Colin Kaepernick. Late to the party, I guess, or early to the party. And then the other thing, so for me, like I said, I got added to the LGBT group at work. But it's separate from the diversity and inclusion group. And that's because we don't want straight people in the group. And I think that's interesting in the workplace. They kind of created this separate group. I didn't create it. I was invited to it, but it was sort of like, we really appreciate the allies, but there's different conversations that are being had. And I think just when you think about that in a business mindset, it's like, it's the difference between tolerance and acceptance, right? And it's also not reducing. In some ways, having a diversity and inclusion Slack group that includes everyone, including all of your straight folk, is in similar ways to saying like, well, I'm colorblind. Right. You're like, well, thank you for trying to express that you get it, but you don't 100% get it. And so we do like having our own space where it just feels a little bit freer. So I think a lot of companies are making strides in the right direction, but I also think, there's just a sensitivity that you have to walk around with. And we walk around with that sensitivity on this show too, because we know that we're not covering every topic. If you've listened to the episodes all the way through, there's like a 40-second disclaimer at the end of every one of our episodes that says, we're doing our best. We're doing the best we can. We're doing our best to be inclusive, but like some folks might not be represented and some folks might be left out. And that's just the reality of it, and we're not angry feminists, and I'm not an angry queer. I'm not like, well, my company didn't do enough. Angry, sometimes we are,
sometimes we're angry.
But I think to answer your question, it's like, you don't want to see something like sexuality weaponized because it makes a company look good. But I think there's also just, you figure out the difference between someone who's legitimately doing their best and someone who's just doing what the trend says to do.
I want to get to that in a moment, but you brought up an interesting side question I want to ask in relation to, you're both talking about sexuality, a subject that's taboo. It's not talked about a lot.
It's uncomfortable.
Do you think that, because you were saying how, hey, this is, there's a certain sensitivity we need to have. Do you think that can sometimes, like, hey, we have to have a sensitivity, not just your show, but just like people in general sometimes. Do you think that sometimes can be a hindrance of like possibly having more people talk about it? Could that possibly not necessarily hurt, but like, oh, maybe that's why it's also difficult to talk about, because people feel like they have to have a sensitivity to it. Can that be kind of like holding things back? Like it's done with the best intentions, but is that maybe a contributing factor as to why it's a taboo thing? It's like, oh, because we have to say it softly, or like we have to say it a certain way. Not to go completely in the opposite end of the spectrum, but I just find that part interesting too. Is like, I wonder if that could be a hindrance as well.
So I think the best example of that in terms of what we talk about is any conversation about gender.
Right.
And I know, Mom, you have had conversations like this where it's like, because people are so like hesitant to say the wrong thing, they don't say anything. Yeah. And sometimes that manifests as, I'm just not going to say anything. Sometimes it manifests as real intolerance.
Right. But sometimes it's just difficulty in, especially in an older generation, of trying to understand, like, wait, I grew up thinking there were only two genders. Now what do I do? And why are there different pronouns? And how do I use they? And some of it is just, there hasn't been the right message and how to understand it. So we will probably have a couple of episodes in the spring semester dealing with gender identity and explaining some of this, because a lot of it, from what I hear, is I don't understand. Can someone explain it to me? And I do think you're right. I think that's part of the hesitancy is I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to step in the, step in it.
Well, and everyone, I think in terms of sensitivity, yes, there's a lot of people I think who feel like they have to walk on eggshells. And I think my response to that is like, no, just break them. Stomp on the eggshells, fuck it up, and then we'll talk about it, And
right.
I know a lot of folks who use, different pronouns will say, like, I'd rather you mess up and then I can just correct you and then we can just move on than have you make it a whole thing, right? If I prefer they and you call me she, well, that's okay as long as when I correct you, you don't get defensive about it, right?
Right. Well,
like have a conversation about it, but don't get defensive.
Right. When we had Lucas on the podcast, I will admit it was difficult for me. And I'll say to like people like Shannon of a different generation, I've had another 30 years dealing with those pronouns, and so it's not out of lack of knowledge. Sometimes it's just hard. It's just hard to remember. And then you just say, sorry, I'm doing my best. And as long as you're doing your true best, so we'll all get through it.
That actually leads perfectly into my next question, because we were talking about kind of like this corporate allyship coming off foe, and then, maybe some people are apprehensive, just, talking about something like sexuality, which can lead to why sexuality doesn't get talked about enough, right? So going with that, because I'm now thinking like I'm putting, let's put a business person's hat on this, and it's like, hey, listen, I only care about money. I don't care about anything else.
Right.
Okay, fine, right? And you want to go after a demographic because, whatever you identify as, you buy stuff.
Right.
Right. Like at the end of the day, you buy stuff. Like, like you were saying at Pride, like I saw a ton of advertisements from so many liquor companies that were just like,
oh yeah, the
like
Svedka every year wraps their bottle in a rainbow.
Everything had a rainbow. Budweiser had the rainbow. Everybody had a rainbow can or bottle or whatever. To me, and I may just this could be out of ignorance, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. You want to wrap your rainbow not your rainbow, a rainbow around a product. Do whatever you want. But how could a company, on a macro sense, and then I also want to talk about an individual, sense as well. How can a company on a macro sense, hey, we want to make money off these people, like that's what companies do, like they go after certain markets, right? What have you seen, or just as far as different companies you've worked for in corporations, how can they do it in a way that's, I guess, genuine? That, and it's just, or like what's a good way to, should they be frank and be like, hey, listen, we sell booze and we know everybody buys booze, so we want you to buy our booze. Like, do you just be super frank about it? Like, do you like, or is there a certain level of sensitivity? But like, how do you not go into it's oversensitivity and then like it has no effect? So how do they work that balance? I mean, again, going back to Steve Burkhart's quote where he's like, hey, if you're a marketer right now with this like very highly so many things being politicized, you're kind of playing with fire. So how does a company appeal to that demographic, or be earnest about it without, I guess, pissing anyone off, or do they accept that like they're going to piss some people off, and that's it, break the eggshells? But then if breaking eggshells
in sexuality,
means,
you are going to piss somebody
but
off.
then breaking eggshells, if that means like there's going to be like a loss of profit, then it's so that kind of thing. Sorry for the long-winded style of that question.
So I think there's different ways to do it, right? So if Budweiser once a year wants to slap a rainbow on their bottle, fine. But what I would like to see is that Budweiser once a year puts out a commercial campaign that has a gay couple in it.
Right.
That's not that hard. You could just have two dudes cheersing in the background with like their tight shorts that they wear, whatever.
Or just steal the SNL Schmitz gay commercial, because honestly, if Budweiser did a version of that,
they'll just slap their logo on that.
Just
and then
slap the logo.
Easy.
Done.
So I think the truth is that representation does matter. So even if it's as simple as they do a fucking Instagram campaign where they just show different people in different relationships, or they fucking show pictures of people drinking at Pride when it's a queer community being represented. Something small like that is at least like, we're not just pandering to you, we also are including you.
So it doesn't have to be an overthought thing. It's just be earnest about it.
No, exactly. Okay. I mean, and then there's
have real representation.
Of course, there's bigger scale examples, right? Like Patagonia gets a lot of shit because they put themselves out there as this like green, sustainable company. People are like, well, you create so much and you make billions of dollars, but they also legitimately upcycle like all of their shit.
Oh, Yvon Chouinard, his book about how he started Patagonia. Ever since I read that, I'm just like, I don't even buy a ton of their stuff, but I just like them as a company.
Right.
Now.
And
they
really...
he was actually walking the walk. Like, he was making mountain climbing equipment, and it put so many holes in the mountain that he stopped making the equipment and switched to clothes because he loved mountain climbing so much. I'm like, that's somebody who's like, oh no, like, I don't care if I know I'm making gangbusters money wise. Like, that's being about that life.
And like a good example too is, well, like I said, like benefits and things, right? It's like if your company's gonna change their logo for the entire month to a rainbow, then their benefits should reflect that, right? That's a bigger scale example. But I remember Alexis Ohanian, the founder of Reddit, was talking about this. I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and he was one of the speakers at it, and he was talking about like reassessing the benefits program that he offered to people at Reddit. And his wife, Serena Williams, was pregnant at the time where he was sort of reassessing all the benefits, and Serena Williams had a pretty horrific pregnancy.
She did.
And he ended up having to take a ton of time off of work, and that was when he had this like, oh God moment, oh shit moment, where he realized the only reason I was able to take all this time off of work is because I'm literally the CEO of Reddit, and no one else at my company has these benefits. And I think, he basically told this story, and it was amazing because this was a marketing conference and he was supposed to be talking about like, how did you start Reddit? And he was like, fuck you, I'm going to talk about benefits for an hour. And he did.
How to treat your employees, right?
But he basically said like, you have to put yourself in the shoes of everyone in your organization in order to be fair. And he's like, and I didn't realize until I was in the position of what the fuck would I do if I was any one of my other employees and my wife was in the hospital for 4 weeks and my daughter was in intensive, care unit, and like I had to take 2 months off of work. No one else would be able to do that. So I think when companies, it's cliched, right? It's like you don't think about it until it happens to you, but think about what if it happened to you? What if you're, you had to adopt because your wife couldn't get pregnant? You would want to have that included. What if your son decided that they identified as a female and they wanted to transition? Like, you just have to think about the possibilities, even if it means coming from a selfish place of thinking about what if it was me? Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's what you have to do.
That's where it starts from.
The
personal is political, right?
It is.
I forgot which comedian it was, but it might have been Chris Rock, where he was just like, it's like, oh, like, you hate on gay people right now, like, guess what the likelihood's going to be like? Your son's going to be coming out next year during Thanksgiving, like.
And that is what it takes sometimes, but I think it would behoove more companies to take into consideration that there's always going to be those people. They're going to be in your life. They're going to be in other people's lives. There's going to be someone who needs IVF. There's going to need someone who needs more paternity leave. There's going to be someone who's going to transition, and they're going to go from being, the best dude on your sales team to the best woman on your sales team. Like, it's just,
it's fine.
These are the realities of life, and it frankly doesn't cost you anymore to pay for that insurance.
Do you think a business can overcorrect? It's like, oh, like, hey, like, all right, we have our first, I don't know, I'm just thinking of a scenario in my head. Like, we have our first trans employee, and now, almost like we were talking about before, like, it's sensitive to the point where it's like a hindrance. Can that happen, or have you ever seen that happen in businesses where they're trying so they're trying so hard to be like look, like, we are so accepting and sensitive that it actually like can maybe put a spotlight on that person where it's like, hey, I just want to like work here and do my thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like using the token whoever, right?
Token whatever minority.
Whatever minority in
whether
your,
it's sexual,
in your brochures
gender.
or whatever. But I haven't seen a lot of that personally. What I've seen is...
Glad you mentioned that, because that was actually going to be another question I had.
I've seen two sides of it. So I've seen the bad side, which is everyone goes along with it. And I had this experience actually because a friend of mine who was transitioning at the time asked everyone at the workplace to use she, her pronouns. And I was applying to do freelance at that company. And when I had asked my friend, is everyone using your pronouns? She was like, yeah, it's actually been really great. Like, everyone's been really respectful. Everyone's been, really keeping on top of him. Like, that's awesome. Then I went in for this freelance interview, and the person I interviewed with was like, yeah, so, he told us that you were great, and, we know him from a previous job, and so it sort of just, like, all fell out, right? It was like, oh, so they're using the right pronouns to her face, but
when they were
to each other when she's not in the room.
So again, like, they talk about that life, but they're not about that life.
Correct. And then,
Gotcha.
But then on the other hand, a really beautiful and wonderful example of acceptance that a lot more companies are doing is very simply just having people put pronouns in their bios. Like if you have a Slack name, put she, her next to your name.
And
if
you're
you
seeing
have,
it now too. It's
like on
interesting.
LinkedIn and stuff.
It's happening so much because now everybody is on Zoom and WebEx, and everyone is putting their pronouns next to their name on the Zoom calls,
Right.
which I'm seeing across.
And the
you know,
reason
all my
that
stuff.
matters, and the reason that's a really important thing for businesses to offer, is because if everyone's doing it, then it's not, oh, I'm strange for having to say she,
Normalized.
she,
That's
her.
that's the whole key. You normalize
So
it.
those are kind of two examples, right? On the one hand, you have people who, the workplace is all kind of like, okay, yeah, great, we'll use the pronouns, but then in a conversation where that person isn't in the room, they're not. But then a really good example is like companies who, open that option up to use your pronouns, to put them in your, profile or whatever, and then it just normalizes it and creates a more comfortable space.
Now, how could you apply that, or would the same mentality apply just maybe on a smaller scale for like a small business that wants to be like, hey, I have this small business that's, next to either nightclubs or businesses that are very involved in the queer community, but I am not in that community, but I want to be supportive and I also want to sell products to them. So is it the same approach with small businesses or even just individual people and businesses and creators, or do they have to approach differently because they're not this, or do they have an advantage that they can approach it differently because they're not this big known entity?
So as someone who works extensively with words, words make a really big impact.
words
And so
Language,
what I do, language, yes. So what I think small businesses, but businesses of any size can do, and this is something I push for constantly, is just think about the language you're using and how inclusive it really is. So, if you're writing an advertisement or, an ad campaign or commercial, it can be a partner. They can be a partner. It doesn't have to be wife or husband or girlfriend or boyfriend. It can just be partner, and partner is very universal. Use they instead of he if you can.
Or just use the
noun.
noun.
I worked on a product recently that was for kids and families, but it said, it was a tent. It was a pop-up tent, and it said, can fit 2 kids and 1 parent. Not every kid has a parent. Some kids have guardians. So I changed it to 2 kids and 1 grown-up. And it's just very simple language like that, but it takes the extra effort to think through, am I including everyone that I possibly can in this message? But ultimately, those are such small tweaks, and they really do make a difference from someone saying, is this for me or is this not for me? And in my approach to branding and, tone of voice and the sort of style guides I use in all the different work I do, that's the question I always come back to is, if someone looks at this, are they going to say this is for me?
Gotcha.
And you could use language. Inclusive language is a huge step that any company of any size can make.
Risk and reward. To say both Shannon and Christine were taking a personal and professional risk when it came to their podcast is putting it mildly, to say the least. Putting out a podcast about sex and sexuality for the entire world to listen to could have easily disrupted their personal lives, their relationships, their professional careers, and even their family. But with all of that at stake, they both determined the potential reward was worth the risk. And that reward was a platform where they could talk about a subject that they were both deeply passionate about, and possibly help some people along the way. We're living in a time where anything and everything we do can easily be put under a microscope. So taking a risk can be terrifying, and justifiably so. But remember, if you want the rewards of starting your own business or simply making a living off of your creative work, then you have to accept the risk of being vulnerable, the risk of putting yourself out there, and the risk of failure. So, going into, again, talking about the business side of not necessarily sexuality, but because you cover sexuality and sex and a number of topics, I think one of the episodes you interviewed the owner of Mr. Sister. Mr.
Yep.
Sister, okay.
Lucas works there.
Lucas has worked there.
Okay.
For 3 years.
So you're interviewing that business owner. That's a business owner that doesn't deal in sexuality, but deals in sex to a degree. And then I think there was a post you had made about a leather company. So has there, after interviewing these people, is there anything that you notice from a business standpoint that are there like challenges or things that a business that either deals in sex or sex products or I don't know, products that are like sex or sexuality adjacent, I guess is the best way I can describe it. Is there do they have like unique business challenges that other businesses don't have to deal with?
I think Lucas talked a bit about the challenge of making all customers feel comfortable because they had a variety of clientele from college students to older couples to people in the kink community. And the challenge was to create an environment where the curious could still feel comfortable and to create a space where there's a lot of information. So I think the challenge was to not be like a freaky sex shop. I think the challenge was to be, hey, we're a legitimate business and we're here to provide a legitimate service with legitimate information, which I was impressed with our interview. And I've frequented the store and they deliver. It's comfortable, it's knowledgeable, and great books in there. Phenomenal books.
Interestingly, though, they do not have an e-commerce site. They only operate in the in-person store.
Because I've heard some things with payment processing. And actually, that leads to a question I have. Because you had just stated that, their thing was, let's not make it be this, freaky sex shop. Right? They want like almost like maybe not tone it down, but like just be like, hey, we're a legitimate business. We're accessible.
And very professional.
It's erotica. I mean, it is erotica, but it's not, Kinks R Us. Yeah. It's erotica. And erotica
However,
is a broad
Kinks R
range.
Us sounds like an amazing business name.
Right?
I
think that Toys R Us
be a
building is still open near the mall. Maybe we could buy it up.
But the reason why I asked that question is fairly recently, right? OnlyFans. And the reason why I bring it up because I think this is an interesting case study, and it happened with Tumblr to a degree as well, where like Tumblr didn't set out to be a business or a site or a platform that dealt in sex, but a lot of people who were selling sex or posting sexual content on there. All right, there's sexual content on tons of websites, but then Tumblr's like, we're gonna just axe this. Yeah. It got to like because like Tumblr was getting big, and then all of a sudden Tumblr's user base went down, plummeted, and then OnlyFans, was not
it's like we made
that would be
you.
like Haagen-Dazs being like, we don't sell ice cream anymore.
So what I thought was interesting is OnlyFans
Sex made you.
OnlyFans was like, hey, we're gonna pivot away from this, even though like that like to a more so than Tumblr, because Tumblr wasn't like, hey, this is what makes us,
exclusively
but OnlyFans was, and then tried to pivot away from it. It didn't work out too well, and they quickly pivoted back. But what I found interesting was I think it was the reasoning behind it that at least what OnlyFans was saying. OnlyFans, the company, was because we have investors now and money and ... That's what they said. Who knows? But the reason why I bring that up is that do you think that, or have you seen businesses that deal in sex or sex related products or in erotica? Do they get to a certain growth point where it's like, oh, we gotta we were doing this, like, hey, we were Kinks R Us, but now we gotta change the name because like we're doing X amount in sales, and now we gotta be like.
Well,
it's inclusive, but going away from the thing that brought you to the dance money wise. So
right.
It's a weird thing.
A pivot that I see in what I'm reading in the sexuality world is sex toys and erotica has turned into a wellness industry. That's how they've rebranded sex.
All right. So thank you for saying rebranding them. That's why I wanted to say, like, do space
wellness and adult retail.
Do people in that space like have to and do they have to rebrand, or is it more like they get to a certain level and they feel like to rebrand, or is it just it's in the pursuit of profit?
I don't know. I just know that it's happening.
Okay.
But I will say, all of the stores that we promoted on our social, those are small companies that really are standing behind authentically what they're selling.
Yeah, real niche.
And I think that is a way that I can't speak for the straight communities, but I can speak for the LGBT communities, that a lot of folks try to buy small business, and because they're like, this is a trans-owned business or this is a queer-owned business. This is a sustainable business. I think buying small is always good, but I think actually weirdly in the adult retail space, it's even better to buy small. You've got better quality control and you've got better, to what we were talking about before, there is obviously less performative allyship. It really is, you're buying from people who saw a niche for wellness and sexuality.
Well, and the other piece of that is you're also seeing much more sex toys being developed by women-owned companies.
And it's very sex positive. There was definitely a time where it was, amazing.net and it was just like,
the amazing
crazy,
superstore.
like crazy kink, whatever. But if you look at these sites now, it's all about being sex positive. It's all you deserve to feel good. You and your partners deserve to feel good. It's all about feeling good. It's not about doing kinky, weird shit. It's about feeling good.
Do you think there's so that's actually an interesting point because you're saying buy small, shop small, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's an advantage? Because we were talking about the risks and possible disadvantages of dealing or selling something that's taboo or very niche or maybe not considered the accepted norm. Do you think that from a business standpoint, do you think there's an advantage in you're dealing in an area that's taboo and that's something that's not the norm? Even with your own podcast, is there an advantage that you're willing to talk about a subject that's not talked about, and then later on, when it if and when it does become more accepted and more shows come out, you're the OG show that's been talking about it. So I wonder if is there an advantage from a business standpoint when you're willing to take that risk or willing to go into a taboo area?
Yeah, I mean, sex sells, but sex ed also sells.
Well, we hope that sexuality
that needs to be a
selling.
Sticker or a T-shirt or something.
Yeah, sex sells,
but also so does sex ed.
But also, I think. Well, and
I mean, I hope so. I hope sexuality starts selling as a positive way of increasing your well-being and increasing your life satisfaction and pleasure in life. All of those things should be selling, not just sexy lingerie and showing lots of skin. The sexualness, the erotic energy is a big factor that hopefully will become more of something that we can market, merchandise, all of those good things.
But to your point earlier, when we were talking about, what did you do to get this started? One of the things we did do was look at competitors in the space. And so, there wasn't a ton of competition in this space. And, there are really popular podcasts that talk about sex, but it's Guys We Fucked. That's one of the podcasts. And then there's another one
Sex with My Mom.
Yeah, that one is a bad example because that's literally a guy talking to his mom about sex, which is this. But talking about, looking at other competitors, there wasn't as much researched sex talk. And so that was where we really saw the opportunity. But
and a lot of it's niche. It's queer.
But that is what you have to do
if stuff like that.
If you're gonna follow a passion project, you do have to be really thoughtful about where your space is in the space. There's spaces within the space, and you have to find yours.
I think that brings up an interesting point and a question I have of. So you're hey, there's an advantage of you're willing to take that risk. You want to talk about the taboo thing, but you had both also said before that, hey, we're putting it out there that we are not the end all be all experts. Mm-hmm. And then, people, one of the reasons why you wanted to do this thing is that people doing their own research, quote unquote, when the space is not filled with a lot of people and with the combination of that on the one hand and on the other hand, anybody can put content out. Is there a concern, because you're addressing it in your own show by saying we're not the experts, but is there a credibility concern? Hey, it's not a space that everybody's in, so cool, I can sprout some misinformation, some bullshit, and it's going to be a while before somebody checks me on it.
Well, I think.
And have either one of you ever seen that and be like, oh no, this is BS?
Well, I would say most of the stuff I've seen out there that takes the same approach that we do academically is pretty well researched, and people bring in the experts when they don't know what to talk about, and that's something we're trying to do a lot more about.
Yeah, we'll
too.
be doing much more.
But
of that.
it's not anything to sneeze at that you're getting your PhD in this at UConn, and that's part of what sold it in too. It wasn't just, hey, we're gonna talk about sex because we want to. It was, hey, I have a background in women's and gender studies and master's in communications, and you're getting your PhD in psychology.
And I can literally get the research articles like when they're online, when they're not available to the public.
I think also the thing about what we're talking about in the field of sex and sexuality is that especially sexuality research is a pretty young field. And so when we say we're not the experts, it's because there's also evolving research coming out all the time. Constant. So we can't be the experts because no one is yet.
Well, and what's happened in the sexuality field is there's been a shift. And it's a slow shift from talking about dysfunction to talking about well-being and pleasure. And that's where we want to be part of that shift.
So I have a question on, you were saying well-being, right? Well-being and pleasure and rebranding of certain types of businesses. And they're going, now it's we don't sell sex toys, we sell wellness products and that kind of thing.
Yes.
I have a question in that.
That'll be the episode we're recording tomorrow soon. So,
and whenever this podcast comes out, it won't be tomorrow.
It won't be chronological, so don't worry about it.
But the reason why I asked that question is that I wonder how much culture plays into how the businesses and like the branding and the changing in branding and how things are perceived. And the reason why I say culture, I wonder if this show was done, not that it's not reaching people globally because it's on a platform where anybody can go, relatively anybody in the world can go listen to it, right? But would this be considered a taboo thing in, another country? Like, would this be even considered a taboo show?
Depends on the country.
Right. Yeah, well, that's what I mean. The reason why I'm getting to that is there something with, America, the U.S., that like specifically culturally where, I'm trying to remember the name, but there's like a UK television show where it has like a very like the set reminds me of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but it's like literally they get a contestant. It's contestants of all ages in the sense of like 18 and up. I'm young, old, whatever, and it's literally like somebody sits there and then like they show a bunch of people and they show everything, like they're completely naked and they just don't show the face, and then like they pick like the person they want to date.
Good God.
Based on
leave it to the UK.
No, like literally just based on how they look naked, and it's like prime time television out there. A friend of mine was showing me the show, and that show would not exist here in the U.S. Or I remember.
Have you seen Naked and Afraid?
But they blur it out.
Not the same.
It's not.
They're not looking
the same.
for a mate. There's only one hookup on Naked and Afraid.
And it's not a game show. It's every week.
They were just trying to stay warm.
Where it's every week. Or it's like, here's Marjorie. She's 56, and here's our 10 contestants. And like literally the whole show is just them and the audience laughing along, making comments about like, oh, that dude's genitals look good. That one's not so good. Like, oh, I like that guy's body, and like that wouldn't exist in the U.S. for certain reasons.
The naked part wouldn't exist, but we objectify all the time.
And the reason why I'm bringing that up is how much does culture play
everything
with as far as like why sexuality is not talked about, why it has to be sensitive. Like would this show even be considered taboo if you were if you were both from a different country where it's like,
well, if you haven't listened to it yet, you should listen to our episode with Bill Shaner from Worcester, because we talk a lot about the Worcester School Committee and why so many people are opposed to talking about sex and sexuality. But yeah, I think it is
actually cultural. That episode is the reason why I brought this question up, because I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a lot of it comes down to religious, political.
Yeah, I mean,
things.
the U.S. is definitely very conservative in terms of discussing sexuality. We have the least comprehensive sex education in most of Western civilization, the Western part of the world. But then if you went to the Netherlands, where they start comprehensive sex ed in preschool and they talk about body autonomy, this would not be as taboo, and maybe some of these myths wouldn't even be myths. For that culture.
I was gonna be the next question. Would it even be considered myths? Like depending on the culture you're born into / raised in.
Some would still be, because a lot of the sexuality research is global studies. There's a lot of global studies looking at frequency, orgasm, pleasure, things of that nature that cross all the cultures. So a lot of it, like for example, maybe the myth that there's no comprehensive sex education in the United States wouldn't be a myth in the Netherlands. But the myth that there's still an orgasm gap is going to be a myth worldwide.
But maybe in the Netherlands, more people would sit down and listen to it.
Right. But it's still, it's still something people still need to learn.
Yeah.
So it might not be as taboo, but the information might still be just as necessary.
Right. Which again kind of comes back to the fact that it is a fluctuating field of research. Even people who are very open to it still need to have the research put in front of them, which is something that we talked about in our last episode when we were talking about the syllabus, is just, even people who want the research don't necessarily have the access to the most relevant research. We were talking to my grandpa last week, and he asked what it means to be woke. And it was funny because he's like, I'm in my 80s. Can I be woke? And I'm like, you can be woke. Being woke is just being open to learning about new things. And it's basically just the antithesis of rigidity in thought.
Mm-hmm. Is it bad that I've heard that word so much used correctly and a lot of times incorrectly that I'm just like...
over it, yeah.
I just can't hear that word anymore just because
I've hearing it come out of an 80-something-year-old man's mouth.
That's interesting.
That was interesting.
But I'm just saying, just as far as just hearing it, all the time, I'm just like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm done.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're meaning it in a positive way or if you're trying to make fun of it. I'm just like, I can't hear this word anymore. It's just, it's lost all meaning.
Put it to bed.
And the reason why I say that, segue.
Boom.
Boom, roasted. I wanted to segue into the question of, is it just a matter of time? Going back to that Chris Rock joke, right? Is it just a matter of time where this is considered, taboo, you're doing a show that's not many people are talking about it. Is it just a matter of time and a matter of enough people talking about it where is it, hey, 10 years from now you're one of the OGs of the space and there's 1,000 or a couple of thousand shows just like Sex Ed Debunked. There's knockoff shows and parody shows of Sex Ed Debunked, which I would actually like to hear the parody version of Sex Ed Debunked or Sex Ed Unabridged. Or Sex
the parody
Ed
of it is just the Bible.
That's right. You got
it. Is it just a matter of time where there's just so much content and people talking about it that it just becomes not a thing anymore? Is that something that has ever crossed your mind? What if it just comes talked about so much that it's just meh, it's not a taboo thing anymore because we're all talking about it.
I think it's a matter of more time than either of us still have on this earth.
Probably
That's
true.
what I think.
You see it trending in the right direction. I think certainly my generation is more, I think generally more accepting of the LGBTQ communities. I can say for having babysat kids who are, 10, 8, 6 right now, they're a lot more open, I think, to the idea of different genders. Mm-hmm. I think every kid I know knows a kid who is non-binary, so I think it's trending that way, but even we've seen it, there's generational gaps now. Again, talking about gender with certain generations is just it just does not compute.
And quite honestly, even parts of the country. I mean, we are talking here in liberal.
Right,
New
we
England,
are the coastal elite. So.
But there are certain parts of.
I don't feel elite. I don't think I'm making enough money to feel elite, but whatever.
But elite in thought, impoverished in finances.
I mean, I'm an idiot hosting this show. That's why I have guests, because the guests are the reason why the show's good. Because if it was just me talking for 2 hours, it would tank. It would tank to I'd have a listenership of 2, and that includes me. So yeah,
it'd just be me on loop.
Yeah.
So yes, it's going to be a matter of time, but a matter of a lot of time. Just like if you look at movements towards civil rights. I mean, have we figured out civil rights yet? No. And that's almost been 100 years now, right? And if you talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, it's been 150 years. Have we figured out civil rights? No. So have we figured out sexuality? We talk about Kinsey, we talk about Masters and Johnson. That's we haven't. And
right.
So time will certainly hopefully make these conversations easier and make these conversations feel more normalized, but I think we're talking about a whole heck of a lot of time before this stuff isn't taboo to some segment of our culture.
Yeah, I think that's the truth, is that there will always be communities and there will always be places where this information is needed as much as other areas might progress.
I think Skipper's giving us the almost time out because we do have to record in the morning.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. All right, so I'll try to... I didn't even realize what time it was. See,
I have to go.
See, everyone, you can just start talking about a subject, and then it just gets...
Anyone can do it. Remember when we said you had to plan it? We lied.
You know, they say something. I've heard it said, "Don't work with family. Don't bring family to the business."
Fair enough.
And you're both talking about a taboo subject, a show called Sex Ed Debunked, and it's a mother-daughter team. Mm-hmm. How does that provide certain difficulties or certain tensions or certain different views? Is there, or is it like, hey, this is great, we're working together, or like, oh, these are like certain unexpected problems have come up because we're working with family?
There are challenges, but I think for me, Shannon pushes me. She challenges me. She doesn't let me just say something and let it sit there. She asks the questions and she challenges it. And I think those really hard conversations is part of what makes this podcast interesting.
Yeah, I think the funny thing is that the subject matter is not the difficult part. I think we converse very naturally, very organically, and it doesn't feel uncomfortable. I think the only areas where we actually butt heads really is the business part, because I'll be like, we have to do our script, Mom. We have to do the social post. The social posts are driving me crazy, but we have to do them every day because it's best practices to have a post out every day. And like, that's where it gets stressful, is we have to figure out our schedule for the week. So
if anyone's interested in being a social media intern.
But that's the funny thing, is I think you would expect, given the subject matter, that maybe the uncomfortable part is the talking about sex, but it's not. The uncomfortable part is, like, I think we're like trying to figure out how to work together as business partners. Yeah. And it's, you know, my mom brings the research to the table and I bring the expertise in producing content, and that's an interesting dynamic that we've never explored that before. We've had a very interesting relationship in a lot of ways, but this is the first time where it's been like, you have to trust me that this is my expertise, and I have to trust you that this is your expertise, and the conversation comes in the middle.
And leads perfectly into another question I have. How do you think your backgrounds in marketing, communications, content, and background as a lawyer, how do you think it's helped the creation and production of the podcast? And have there been things where it's hindered? It's almost kind of like, oh, hey, I got to turn that part of my brain off, or I got to like let go of that.
I think that we both are very comfortable talking. I think as an attorney, you got very comfortable with, you know, knowing how to present a case and present an argument. I think for me,
and structure,
and that's the same thing for me.
And clarity.
You know, I've worked on a pre-sales team before, where much of my job was trying to pitch something to a client with a lot at stake, and so that for me, I know that taught me to be very like level-headed with how I deliver information, but it also, you know, I'm always thinking about the next thing that I'm going to say and how that ties everything together in a bow at the end. And I was
a pre-sales engineer, so I know.
Yeah, so you understand. But I think, you know, even our first recording session, you know, full disclosure, I never listened to podcasts before starting to do a podcast. I produced them and I would sound check them, but I would never listen to the final product, and I don't listen to them. I listen to one podcast recreationally, and that is My Favorite Murder. And I just like it a lot.
And I, full disclosure, don't listen to this on podcast because I'm afraid how that's going to impact how I deliver the podcast.
But the reason I mention that...
It's like a weird Schrodinger's cat thing
going on.
Right?
Where is the podcast?
There's psychology for you.
But the reason I mention that is because we recorded our first episode, and our sound engineer, when we wrapped up, was like, wow, that was so put together. He's like, I've never, like, you just went for it. And we almost never have edits to the episode because we have just such a comfortable way of conversing with one another. So I think that's where our backgrounds really benefit us, you know, as someone in communications and as someone who came from a sales and marketing background. For me, talking about a subject, and the other thing is talking about a subject that maybe I don't know everything about, but having to be the expert on it is something you have to do in sales all the time, is speak passionately about an industry you know nothing about. And of course, I know about this subject, which makes it easier, but it definitely has served me well to be able to say, even if I don't know everything, I can ask the right questions.
Yes, definitely. And I have to be careful. So you said, like, one of the things I have to be careful about, I have to really be careful about what my husband likes to say is using my lawyer voice.
That's true.
And I have to remember to be more conversational rather than trying to, like, sometimes I get very passionate and I'm like, but you need to understand.
Exhibit A.
Yes. And so that's
Did you order the code red?
Yeah.
Did you order the code red?
Mom, order in the fucking court. Jesus Christ.
So that's the stuff I have to try to put aside a little bit and be more casual, because I do come from a very serious profession.
Yeah, and you'll occasionally like soapbox because you're like really trying to prove a point, and I'll do like the like finger roll where I'm like, okay, wrap it up, they get it.
I'm not a big fancy. Oh, wait a minute, I am a big fancy lawyer.
It's me. Yes.
How is there any interesting challenges or things that you noticed when, especially working with Trailblaze Media, like how the show is marketed and packaged, especially in this, it's a subject that's not talked about a lot. Like, does that provide challenges, opportunities, a little bit at column A, column B, as far as the marketing and packaging, and even just like, because I noticed even like the graphic, like for the title cards of the show, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, kind of reminded me of Saved by the Bell. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't know if that was an intentional decision or if that was just like a serendipitous, like happy accident. I don't know if that's part of like the marketing or whatnot.
Yeah, I think it's column A, column B, because, you know, we work within the capacities of Trailblaze, which are very good, but like I have a lot of friends who are designers. I have a lot of friends that, you know, work in this field. And so if I wasn't doing this with Trailblaze, I might, you know, have more opportunity to on a different time framework on things. You know, we're working with an agency, which means we're kept in a very specific timeline for deliverables and whatever. Whereas if I just shot the shit with one of my friends and was like, hey, make me a logo, it could happen, you know, in a week and it would be off the wall and crazy. But
which we still might do.
Which we still, you know, we'll do stickers and stuff like that, and then we'll freelance those out. But on the other hand, you know, it's really great to have the just utter professionalism of working with Ezra. And again, like, you know, we presented this to Chris, the president of Trailblaze, and he didn't have pushback about the subject at all. And so I think where we feel really confident with Trailblaze as a partner is that we know that they trust our vision. And it's really, you don't get that everywhere, where your partner that you're working with really like trusts you to do right by them. And I think we both feel that about each other. I think they feel like we're really good partners, and we feel like they're really great partners. And
for me, I could say, like, when we record and Ezra's doing, I love it, the fact that Ezra's leaning forward and listening. You know, like he's actually, he's not
getting
just,
into it.
He's not just the production guy. He's actually
just like, all right, like this is podcast number 8 I got to record today. Like, whatever, here, your office is good.
He's definitely like intent with what we're discussing.
And you know what, too? I'll say, like, they do listen. And I know that the folks at Trailblaze listen. And, you know, they approached us, the designer and Ezra approached us, and they were like, you know, I think maybe we should do a rebrand. It's like they listened to the podcast and they got a better understanding of what it was all about through our first semester and came to us and said, like, do you want to tweak this at all now that we like really know what this show is? And it was really nice to have that sort of, you know, copacetic, yeah, we do, because we feel like now we really know who we are. And so you can expect a rebrand at some point in the next semester, because they followed our vision and kind of aligned with us, and we're like, okay, we're gonna revisit now that we really know who we are.
You would have thought I planned this, but besides rebranding, what plans do you have, or plans and or aspirations do you have for the show, both from like a creative and content standpoint, maybe ideas you haven't tackled yet, but also from a professional standpoint? Like, are there, you know, like, hey, how can we take this and make like not just one revenue stream, but multiple revenue streams out of it? Maybe have a Patreon, maybe have a Discord, maybe, you know, sell an NFT, because that's what everybody's freaking doing nowadays.
Yeah. You know, I think we kind of started slow because we were getting into it and getting our groove. And I feel like now we have a lot of myths that we want to debunk that people have submitted to us. And so we're kind of building that loyal followership. You know, we're definitely bringing in more guests and bringing in more experts and trying to expand that network. You know, we've talked about wanting to get booths at, you know, relevant events, get a booth at Pride, get a booth, you know, at some of these conferences that are about sexuality and health, and just continue to spread the message. You know, we joked about it, but like, yeah, we want to do stickers and stuff, because I think it's just fun to get that kind of marketing out there. Eventually, yeah, you want to do merchandising, and eventually you want to do the t-shirt that says Sex Ed sells. You know, like we want to do all of that stuff. I want to see
old school or hear like old school sitcom style commercials.
Oh yeah,
show.
We're playing. That's kind of our mood board for the next rebrand, is to lean a lot more into the like Saved by the Bell and Family Matters type branding,
and a little more school focused with like composition notebooks and
cheat sheets and things. But yeah, I mean, of course, this is a business, right? So we want to sell, and that is part of our agreement with Trailblaze, is like, yes, this will eventually be profitable. But at the end of the day, what we care about most is getting the information to the right people. And the good news is that when you start making money and you start making a profit, that does happen. You start to, roll into a larger network, and you get the snowball effect of more people catching on because they see this, they see the shirt, or they see the sticker, or they see whatever. So in a perfect world, that works.
Someday.
Well, wear your stickers, Jane.
And we're talking about doing some video content as well, and trying to position ourselves to some extent as subject experts in certain areas as well, so that we can, get into the local market a bit more.
Yeah, and in that case, being the ones who are willing to talk about the things that are taboo becomes beneficial, because if you're not afraid to be the one that talks about the thing no one wants to talk about, then
you become the authority on it.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it works. Classic marketing.
So what advice would you have for any creative entrepreneur, advice for your previous selves? Just somebody wondering, like, hey, I want to do this thing, but there's risk, or it's taboo, or it's niche. From your travels, things that you learned, what advice would you give? And maybe what advice would you have given your former self? Like, hey, if I wish I would have known X, Y, and Z.
Advice to myself. Well, first of all, I think I would say this is going to be a time commitment. You better know what you're getting yourself into. Advice to other people is find someone like Shannon who has a vision that can be laid out and really be organized. She's a super organized person, and I'm very structured too, but I don't have all the technology. I don't have let's set up the Google Drive and the Google Sheets and this and that. And I think having a real organizational structure gives you a way to move forward that's not overwhelming. So we do this in bits and pieces. We don't have the whole entire semester planned out yet, but we have a framework. And I think my advice to someone would be like, think through 3 to 6 months. Don't think about what you're doing tomorrow or just what I'm doing tomorrow. Think about what your life is going to feel like and what your commitment's going to be like, and then say, am I willing to take the risk for the benefit? And I think the risk-benefit calculation for us was like, what do we have to lose? We're putting ourselves out there, and we're going to put out good content. And whether we have 100 listeners or 100,000 listeners, those listeners are going to get really good information that's going to really help their lives.
Yeah. So for me, first off, I think it's putting a plan behind your passion.
Yeah.
Yes, hold on to your passion.
It's kind of what I said, but you said it better.
Well,
because you're the marketer.
Well, there's, I think it's like Thoreau that said it's okay to build your castles in the clouds, but you do have to build a foundation under it.
That's it.
And so that's one piece of advice. And the other piece of advice is to take the opportunity when it's given to you. I didn't know what I wanted to have a podcast about, but I recognized a good opportunity when it was offered to me. And I think sometimes just saying yes leads you to the right thing. And I didn't say, yes, absolutely. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about though, but I did say, that would be really exciting. I am really interested in that. Let me get back to you with some ideas, and call it serendipitous or what you will. But we had that conversation the next day. And because I had said yes, I was able to turn around and email 2 days later with a content plan. So say yes.
So find a good collaborator.
So yeah, that's what I would say. And it's like, come into it prepared. Every opportunity that you're offered in your life is like a job interview that you want to be the most prepared for. Even if the opportunity is just someone casually saying, hey, would you want to maybe do a podcast? Be ready for the interview.
Yeah.
So we're at the end of the show. And I want to
finally let Skipper speak. Sure.
Yeah, yes.
Let the cat speak.
We're gonna give Skipper the mic. But I want to give you both the opportunity, because it's something I always do at the end of the show, where I've said it before, I'll say it again. I stole the idea from Hot Ones, and the beneficial thing is you don't have to eat hot wings, unless you want to. I mean, maybe that'll be a thing for the next show. But go off, promote the show. Talk about whatever you want to talk about the next, these next minutes or hour, if you really want to go off. They're yours to say, promote, talk about whatever you want. So, the last minutes, these are your minutes. Feel free to go off.
Cool. So Sex Ed Debunked, you can find it on all of the places that you stream podcasts. Our episodes are usually between 25 and 40 minutes. They might be a little bit more this semester. We definitely recommend going back and listening to the first season, but for those of you who consider yourself already sex educated, the next season is going to be a lot more in depth about everything from kink to what it really means to have different genders to
the
sexuality, myth of monogamy,
That'll be fun.
polyamory. Yeah, there's going to be a lot covered, I think, and we're gonna try to bring in a lot more experts to have more conversations like this one. I think it's a topic that some people might shy away from, and that's what we've talked about here today. Is it can be a topic that can be daunting, but we're a family having a conversation about this. So if there's any safe space to have the conversation, it's probably the two of us just kind of talking it out.
Yeah, and we're a safe space for you to reach out, sexeddebunked@gmail.com. Anyone who has any questions that they are curious about. And this is
we need
a show
more
about curious
questions.
people.
Yes, more questions. We are so excited every time someone's like, well, can you talk about this? Like, we're going to talk about menopause myths. We're going to talk about the myth.
Sexuality and aging.
We're going to talk about, cherry popping. We're going to talk about loose vaginas and why you think that it's loose
Hookup
when
culture.
you hook up with 12 people, but not loose when you have sex with the same person 10 times. There's a lot of things that people have asked us to talk about. And that's like truly what we do it for, listen to the podcast, but also, tell us your questions. It's totally a safe space. Send us an email. The only people that read the emails are us. Send us a message on Instagram. We're the only people that monitor that account. So it is very safe. And we're just happy to continue having these conversations for as long as we can have them for.
So thanks for bringing us on, and keep listening to the podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you both for coming on. And for anybody and everybody listening, the show is Sex Ed Debunked. It's on every available podcast platform, and some I've even never have heard of until I was doing my research for this episode.
Like, what the fuck is that? Yeah.
But Shannon and Christine Curley, thank you so much for wanting to come on this. And Skipper and Mango the cats, of course.
Yeah, if you hear any scuttering or running
awkward
or
pauses,
galloping,
it's their fault.
Yeah,
they're gonna have their own podcast soon enough. But Shannon,
podcast.
Christine, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for talking about the creation of your idea and your podcast, and I hope that it's helped some people out there. And for anybody listening to this show, keep on listening to it. And
keep
also
listening. It's not bad.
Yeah, and yeah. I try.
It's all right. Yeah,
I try. Yeah, it's. I want to put that as like this one. It's all right.
You've got a review on Apple Podcasts.
It's
all
okay.
right. Yeah.
It's okay.
Would listen for free.
It's fine. It's fine and fun.
We appreciate it. Thank you, Jay.
But their show is Sex Ed Debunked, and until next time, everybody, keep on creating. Thanks.
All right, keep on creating. I like that.
And that's it for this episode of The Creative Capital Show. Thank you for listening, and a special thanks goes to this episode's guests, Shannon and Christine Curley. The Creative Capital Show is hosted, recorded, and produced by me, Jason Sylvia, with audio editing and mixing by Anthony Ferreira. You can listen to The Creative Capital Show over at our website, creativecapitalshow.com. We're also available on Anchor FM, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all other major podcast hosting platforms. If you like the show, please subscribe. It helps the show out a lot. And be sure to follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the show, and until next time, keep on creating.